Eleanor Price's hands trembled as the stagecoach door swung open to the dusty Colorado territory. Through the window, a tall cowboy with sun-weathered skin stood waiting. Samuel Hart, the stranger she'd agreed to marry through letters alone. Her heart hammered. What madness had brought a Boston banker's daughter to this wild frontier? As the driver offered his hand, she froze, unable to move. Then Samuel stepped forward, his calloused palm extended, his blue eyes steady. "I'll wait as long as you need, Miss Price." Welcome to a story of courage, second chances, and the love that blooms in the unlikeliest of places. Stay with me until the very end, and please, comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see how far Eleanor and Samuel's journey has traveled across the world. The stagecoach wheels had been grinding against Colorado dirt for 3 days, each rotation carrying Eleanor Price further from everything she'd ever known and closer to a future she could barely imagine. Now, as the vehicle shuddered to its final stop in Red River Crossing, that future stood 6 feet tall in dusty boots and a worn leather vest, waiting with the patience of a man who'd learned that the West moved at its own pace. Eleanor's fingers clutched the velvet curtain, her knuckles white beneath her traveling gloves. Through the gap, she studied him. Samuel Hart, the man whose carefully penned letters had arrived at her Boston boarding house like lifelines thrown across an impossible distance. In those letters, he'd been eloquent, thoughtful, even poetic when describing the Colorado sunsets. But letters couldn't capture the breadth of a man's shoulders, the weathered lines around his eyes, or the way he stood with one thumb hooked in his belt, scanning the coach with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Price?" The driver's voice cracked through her paralysis. "We've arrived, ma'am. Red River Crossing." Eleanor nodded but didn't move. Her traveling dress, a deep burgundy silk that had seemed so practical in Boston, now felt ridiculous, too fine, too Eastern, too much like armor that wouldn't protect her from anything that mattered out here. "Ma'am?" The driver tried again, and this time she heard the concern beneath his impatience. He had other stops to make, other lives to deposit in their appointed places. "I'm coming," she whispered, but her body refused to cooperate. Outside, she could see the small crowd that had gathered, not the welcoming committee she might have hoped for, but the curious onlookers that any spectacle attracted in a frontier town. Women in calico dresses and sunbonnets, men in work clothes, their faces carved by wind and sun. Children darting between adults, their eyes bright with the excitement of watching someone else's drama unfold. And at the center of it all, Samuel Hart, who hadn't moved an inch. The driver climbed down with a heavy sigh, and Eleanor heard his boots hit the dirt, heard the murmur of voices as he exchanged words with Samuel. Then footsteps approaching her door, and her breath caught in her throat. The door swung open. Sunlight flooded in, so bright after the coach's dim interior that she had to squint. The driver extended his weathered hand, his expression patient but firm. "Come on now, miss. Can't sit in there forever." But Eleanor's legs had turned to lead. She'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times during the journey, the graceful descent, the composed smile, the confident handshake with her betrothed. Instead, she sat frozen, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "It's all right to be scared, you know." The voice was deeper than she'd imagined, rich and steady, like creek water over smooth stones. Samuel had moved closer, and now she could see him clearly, not just the rugged exterior, but the kindness in his eyes, the gentle quirk of his mouth that suggested he understood exactly what she was feeling. "I was terrified when I first came here," he continued, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. 13 years old, holding my mother's hand while my father drove our wagon into this valley. Everything looked wrong, too big, too empty, too different from Pennsylvania. I wanted to turn around and go home. Eleanor found her voice, though it came out smaller than she'd intended. "What changed your mind?" "My mother told me something I've never forgotten." Samuel shifted his weight, and she realized he was deliberately making himself less imposing, angling his body so he wasn't towering over her. She said, "Samuel, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to take the next step anyway." And then she asked me, "Can you manage just one step?" He extended his hand, palm up, calloused and strong and steady. "So I'm asking you the same thing, Miss Price. Not asking you to be brave for a lifetime or even for a day. Just asking if you can manage one step, just one, and I'll be right here to make sure you don't fall." Eleanor looked at his hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. In Boston, she'd been taught that a lady never touched a gentleman without proper introduction, that physical contact should be minimal and always gloved. But this wasn't Boston, and the rules that had governed her old life seemed as distant as the Atlantic Ocean. She placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, and as he helped her down from the coach, she felt the strength in him, not just physical, though he had plenty of that, but something deeper. The kind of strength that came from enduring hardship and choosing kindness anyway. Her feet touched Colorado soil for the first time, and the world tilted. Whether from the journey's exhaustion or the magnitude of what she'd just done, Eleanor swayed, and Samuel's other hand immediately steadied her elbow. "I've got you," he said quietly. "Take your time." The crowd had pressed closer, and Eleanor felt their eyes on her like physical weight. She straightened her spine, drawing on 23 years of deportment lessons and social conditioning. She might be terrified, but she'd be damned if she'd let them see it. "Thank you, Mr. Hart," she said, her voice steady now. "That was very kind." "Samuel," he corrected gently. "We're past formalities, I think." "Then you must call me Eleanor." Something shifted in his expression, pleasure, maybe, or relief. "Eleanor," he repeated, and the way he said her name, with that slight Western drawl, made it sound like something new. "Welcome to Red River Crossing." He gestured to the town behind him, and Eleanor finally allowed herself to look around properly. Red River Crossing was smaller than she'd imagined, a single main street lined with wooden buildings that looked like strong wind might carry them off. But there was a church with a white steeple, a general store with glass windows, and what appeared to be a respectable boarding house with flower boxes beneath the windows. Not Boston, certainly, but not the lawless wilderness she'd feared either. "It's not much," Samuel said, following her gaze, "but it's growing. 5 years ago, there were half as many buildings. 10 years ago, there was nothing but the fort and a handful of tents. We're building something here." "It's..." Eleanor searched for the right word. "It's more substantial than I expected." A woman's laugh cut through the crowd, sharp and knowing. "Well, listen to that. Substantial. That's a fancy word for not much, ain't it?" Eleanor's cheeks burned, but Samuel's expression didn't change. He turned toward the speaker, a blonde woman in a faded dress who stood with her arms crossed and an amused smirk on her painted lips. "Miss Cassidy," Samuel said evenly, "I don't recall inviting you to this particular welcome." "Public street, Samuel Hart. I got as much right to be here as anybody." The woman, Miss Cassidy, looked Eleanor up and down with unconcealed amusement. "Just wanted to see what kind of fool woman would travel 2,000 miles to marry a man she ain't never met. Got my answer, I suppose." "Ruby, that's enough." This voice belonged to an older woman who'd pushed through the crowd, her silver hair pinned in a neat bun, her expression stern. "The girl just arrived. Let her catch her breath before you start circling like a vulture." "I'm just being friendly, Martha," Ruby Cassidy said, but she stepped back, her eyes still dancing with malicious amusement. The older woman turned to Eleanor, and her expression softened slightly. "Martha Brennan, I run the boarding house. Samuel arranged a room for you, proper and respectable, separate from the men's side. You'll stay there until..." She paused delicately. "Until arrangements are finalized." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude toward Samuel. He'd anticipated her need for space, for time. "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. That's very thoughtful." "The driver's already loading your trunk," Samuel said. "I thought you might want to rest and freshen up before we talked properly. It's been a long journey." It was the second kindness he'd shown her in as many minutes, and Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Whatever else Samuel Hart might be, he wasn't a brute. He wasn't going to force her into anything before she was ready. "I would appreciate that," she said. "Very much." The crowd was already dispersing, the show apparently over. Ruby Cassidy sauntered away with one last assessing look, and the others drifted back to their business. Only Martha Brennan remained, and a younger woman who stood slightly apart from the others, dark-haired and serious-faced, watching the proceedings with quiet interest. "That's Dr. Kate Morrison," Samuel said, noticing Eleanor's gaze. "She's the town physician, one of the best doctors in the territory, though some folks are still getting used to the idea of a woman in the profession. The doctor nodded a greeting but didn't approach. Eleanor had the sense that Kate Morrison was reserving judgment, waiting to see what kind of person Eleanor would prove to be. It was a refreshing change from Ruby Cassidy's immediate hostility or Martha Brennan's cautious welcome. "Come along, dear," Martha said, already moving toward the boarding house. "I've got tea ready and a basin of warm water. You'll want to wash off the trail dust." Samuel released Eleanor's elbow but stayed close as they walked across the street. "I'll bring your trunk up in a few minutes, and then, if you're willing, perhaps we could talk over supper. There's a dining room at the boarding house. Nothing fancy, but Martha's cooking is the best in town." "That would be acceptable," Eleanor said, then winced at how formal she sounded. "I mean, yes, I'd like that." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "It's all right to be proper, Eleanor. You don't have to be someone you're not." But who was she really? Eleanor Price of Boston had been a banker's daughter, educated in literature and music, trained in needlework and watercolors. She'd been useful in her father's house, decorative at social gatherings, and utterly unprepared for the life that had crashed down on her 6 months ago. "Here we are," Martha announced, pushing open the door to the boarding house. Inside it was blessedly cool and surprisingly clean. The floors were swept, the windows were clear, and there were actual curtains, faded but respectable. A parlor opened to the right, furnished with mismatched but comfortable-looking chairs, and a staircase led upward to what Eleanor assumed were the rooms. "Second floor, end of the hall," Martha said. "Private, quiet, and it catches the evening breeze. You'll be comfortable enough." Samuel had already retrieved her trunk from the coach and was carrying it with apparent ease, though Eleanor knew it was heavy with the books and few possessions she'd deemed worth bringing. He started up the stairs, and Martha gestured for Eleanor to follow. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a window that looked out over the main street and the mountains beyond. It was nothing like her bedroom in Boston, with its canopy bed and silk wallpaper, but there was something honest about it. No pretension, no illusion, just a room in a frontier town, waiting for her to make it her own. Samuel set the trunk at the foot of the bed. "I know it's not what you're used to." "It's fine," Eleanor interrupted, and was surprised to find she meant it. "It's more than fine." "Thank you, Samuel." He nodded, hat in hand now, and she realized he was giving her an out. If she wanted to say she'd made a mistake, that she couldn't go through with this, now would be the time. But the words didn't come. "I'll let you rest," he said. "Supper's at 6. No pressure, but I hope you'll join me." After he left, Eleanor sank onto the bed and finally let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done. She was in Colorado territory, 2,000 miles from everything familiar, about to marry a stranger. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness, that she should demand passage on the next stage back east. But the rational part of her mind had led her to this point in the first place. She thought of her father's funeral 6 months ago, the quiet ceremony, the reading of the will, the shocked discovery that the man she'd thought prosperous was actually drowning in debt. She thought of her cousin Margaret's tight smile as she explained that, of course, Eleanor could stay with them. But there were expectations, duties, and the understanding that an unmarried woman of 23 was already bordering on spinsterhood and really should be grateful for any offer that came her way. She thought of the letters that had started arriving in response to her carefully worded advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper. Most had been crude, some had been laughable, and a few had been genuinely frightening. But Samuel Hart's letters had been different, measured, honest, and surprisingly literate. He'd told her about his ranch, his parents' death in a prairie fever outbreak 2 years prior, and his desire for a partner rather than a servant. "I won't lie and say it's easy out here," he'd written in his third letter. "The winters are hard, the work is constant, and there are days when the loneliness feels like it might swallow you whole. But there's beauty too, sunsets that paint the whole sky gold, air so clean it almost hurts to breathe, and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. I'm looking for a woman who can see both sides of that coin and decide it's worth the trade. If that's you, Miss Price, then I'd be honored to make your acquaintance." It had been the most honest proposal of marriage she'd ever received, and she'd accepted it. Now here she was, and there was no going back. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Price, I've brought the water for washing." Martha entered with a younger girl carrying a basin of steaming water. They set it on the washstand, and Martha produced a fresh towel from seemingly nowhere. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "You've been very kind." Martha studied her for a long moment. "Samuel's a good man. Lost his parents young, had to grow up fast, but he's got a good heart. He wouldn't have sent for you if he didn't think he could make you happy." "And what about Ruby Cassidy?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. Martha's mouth tightened. "Ruby works at the saloon. She's got her own notions about Samuel Hart, but that's all they are, notions. He's never encouraged her, though she's tried hard enough. Don't let her get under your skin." After Martha left, Eleanor stripped off her traveling dress and washed with the warm water, scrubbing away 3 days of dust and sweat. She changed into a simpler day dress, still more formal than what she'd seen the local women wearing, but at least it was clean. She unpinned her dark hair, brushed it out, and repinned it in a style that was slightly less severe than her usual. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back had shadows under her eyes and a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there 6 months ago. But there was something else, too. A determination, maybe. Or the beginnings of hope. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "You crossed half a continent. You can manage one supper conversation." The sun was lowering toward the mountains when Eleanor made her way downstairs. The dining room was filling with boarders, mostly men, she noticed, ranch hands and prospectors and traveling salesmen. They fell silent when she entered, and she felt their eyes tracking her movement across the room. Samuel stood when he saw her, gesturing to a table by the window that was set for two. He'd cleaned up as well, she noticed. Fresh shirt, hair still damp from washing, beard neatly trimmed. He looked younger somehow, and the nervousness in his eyes made her feel slightly better about her own anxiety. "You look refreshed," he said as she sat down. "The room is acceptable?" "Very much so. Thank you again for arranging it. I thought," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I thought you'd want some time, to be sure. No pressure, no expectations. I meant what I wrote in my letters, Eleanor. I'm looking for a partner, not a transaction." Martha appeared with plates of food, roast beef, potatoes, vegetables that Eleanor didn't recognize. "Eat up," she commanded. "Both of you look like you need it." The first few minutes of the meal passed in awkward silence, both of them focused on their plates. Finally, Samuel cleared his throat. "I suppose we should talk about expectations," he said. "What you're hoping for, what I can offer, how this might work." Eleanor set down her fork. "Perhaps you should tell me about the ranch first. Your letters were descriptive, but I'd like to hear more." Samuel's face lit up in a way that transformed him. "It's about 2,000 acres in the valley, following the creek up into the foothills. My father chose the spot because of the water, good grazing year-round, timber for building, and shelter from the worst of the winter winds. We've got about 200 head of cattle now, some horses, chickens, and I've been thinking about adding sheep, though the other ranchers think I'm crazy." "Why sheep?" "Diversification. Cattle prices fluctuate, and a hard winter can wipe out a herd. Sheep are hardier, and wool provides steady income even when beef prices drop." He caught himself. "Sorry, I get carried away talking about ranching." "No, it's fascinating," Eleanor said, and meant it. "It's practical, strategic." "That's exactly what my father used to say. He was a banker back in Pennsylvania before he decided to come west. Said he was tired of handling other people's money and wanted to build something tangible." Samuel paused. "He taught me to think long-term, to plan for hard times while enjoying the good ones. That's what I'm trying to do, build something that lasts. And where do I fit into those plans?" The question hung between them, honest and necessary. Samuel met her eyes directly. "I need a partner, Eleanor. Someone who can manage the household side while I'm out with the herd, who can handle the books because I'm better with cattle than numbers, who can think alongside me about the future we're building. My mother did all that before she died. The ranch ran smooth as clockwork because she and my father worked together." He paused. "But I'm not my father, and you're not my mother. We'll have to find our own way." "What if I'm not suited for ranch life?" Eleanor asked quietly. "What if I fail?" "Then we figure it out together. Look, I'm not expecting you to transform overnight into some kind of frontier woman. I know this is all new and probably terrifying. But I believe you're stronger than you think, or you never would have gotten on that stagecoach in the first place. Martha returned to clear their plates and brought coffee, strong and black, nothing like the delicate tea Eleanor was used to. She sipped it carefully, using the time to gather her thoughts. I need you to understand something, she said finally. I didn't come here because I was adventurous or brave. I came because I had no other choice. My father died in debt. My relatives made it clear I was a burden, and remaining in Boston meant either poverty or accepting marriage to... She stopped, unable to finish. To someone worse than me? Samuel's tone was gentle, not offended. To someone who saw me as property, as decoration, as something to be managed. She looked up at him. Your letters made it sound like you saw me as a person. That's why I accepted. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. My mother once told me that the best marriages aren't built on romance. They're built on respect. Romance fades, she said, but respect, if you tend it properly, only grows stronger. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I respect you, Eleanor, for your courage in coming here, for your honesty right now, and for being willing to give this a chance despite everything stacked against it. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, the foundation upon which love might eventually be built. I'll need time, she said, to adjust, to learn, to see if this life is something I can manage. Take all the time you need. We can announce a courtship, take a few weeks or even months before making anything official. I'm not going anywhere. But the arrangement, the understanding was that we'd marry fairly quickly. Arrangements can change. Samuel's voice was firm. I'd rather wait and build something real than rush into something we'll both regret. If that means the whole town gossips about us for a few months, so be it. The relief that washed over Eleanor was so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes. She'd been braced for pressure, for demands, for the assertion of male authority that her cousin's husband had wielded like a weapon. Instead, she'd found patience. Thank you, she whispered. They finished their coffee as the dining room emptied around them. Through the window, Eleanor could see the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that she'd never seen in Boston. It was beautiful and alien, and somehow full of promise. Would you like to take a walk? Samuel asked. I could show you around the town, introduce you to some folks, or if you're tired, I completely understand. Eleanor surprised herself by saying yes. Red River Crossing looked different in the evening light, softer, more welcoming. Samuel walked beside her with his hands clasped behind his back, pointing out various buildings and sharing their histories. The general store owned by the Henderson family, who'd come from Missouri 5 years ago. The church where Reverend Holt preached every Sunday, though he also worked as a carpenter during the week. The blacksmith shop run by Tom Chen, who'd come from San Francisco and could fix anything metal. It's a mixed community, Samuel explained. Folks from all over, East Coast, Midwest, South, even some from overseas. Out here, what matters is whether you pull your weight, not where you came from. They passed the saloon and Eleanor tensed, but Samuel steered them to the opposite side of the street without comment. Music and laughter spilled from the doors, and she caught a glimpse of Ruby Cassidy through the window, serving drinks with practiced efficiency. She's not a bad person, Samuel said quietly. Just lonely, I think. This life is hard on women, especially women like Ruby who don't have family or respectable employment options. You're kind to think of it that way. My mother taught me that nobody's all good or all bad. We're all just people trying to get by as best we can. He paused at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. That includes you and me, Eleanor. We're both just trying to build something better than what we left behind. In the distance, Eleanor could see lights beginning to appear in scattered ranches and homesteads across the valley. Each one represented someone else who'd taken a chance on this wild country, who'd decided that the promise of the West was worth the risk. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Do you ever regret it? Coming here, staying here, choosing this life? Samuel thought for a moment. There are hard days when I wonder what life would have been like if my father had stayed in Pennsylvania. If I'd grown up in a city, gone to university, became a lawyer or a banker like he was. He looked out at the darkening landscape. But then I remember the feeling of riding out at dawn with the valley spread below me, or watching a calf take its first steps, or sitting on my porch and knowing that everything I can see is mine because I built it with my own hands. That's worth something. That's worth a lot, actually. I hope I can learn to see it that way, Eleanor said softly. You will. Give it time. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence. At the door, Samuel tipped his hat. I'll come by tomorrow morning if that's all right. Thought I'd show you the ranch. Let you see what you'd be getting into. No commitments, just information. I'd like that, Eleanor said, and realized she meant it. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with strange sounds drifting through the window, someone playing a fiddle in the distance, cattle lowing, the wind whispering through the pines, Eleanor felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was there. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. That Samuel Hart was who he appeared to be. That this strange, wild place might become home. She thought of his hand extended toward her at the stagecoach, steady and patient, waiting for her to take that first step. She thought of his words over supper, his willingness to wait, his respect for her fear and uncertainty. And she thought of tomorrow, when she'd see the ranch and begin to understand what kind of life she might build here. Outside, the Colorado night settled over Red River Crossing, and Eleanor Price closed her eyes, ready to see what morning would bring. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, painting Eleanor's small room in shades of gold and amber that seemed impossibly bright after Boston's gray dawns. She'd woken before sunrise to the sound of roosters crowing and the rumble of wagon wheels on the street below, sounds that would have been jarring a week ago, but now felt like the rhythm of a world she was slowly beginning to understand. She dressed carefully in her simplest day dress, a practical navy cotton that her cousin Margaret had sniffed at as being hardly suitable for any social occasion, and pinned her hair in a no-nonsense bun. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who might, with time and effort, belong in this place. Samuel was waiting in the boarding house parlor when she came downstairs, hat in hand, looking scrubbed clean and slightly nervous. Martha Brennan was already pressing a basket into Eleanor's hands before she could protest. Breakfast and lunch, Martha said firmly. You'll be out at the ranch all day, and I'll not have Samuel thinking I sent you off without proper provisions. There's bread, cheese, some cold chicken, and a jar of my apple preserves. Mrs. Brennan, you didn't have to— Hush now, it's done. Martha's stern expression softened slightly. The ranch is beautiful, dear. Try to see it with open eyes. Samuel helped Eleanor into the wagon he'd brought, a sturdy buckboard with a seat that had been covered with what looked like a new blanket. The gesture touched her more than it probably should have. It's about an hour's ride, Butcheraz, he said as he guided the horses onto the main road leading out of town. The first part follows the creek, then we head up into the valley. Fair warning, the last stretch gets a bit rough. They rode in silence for the first few minutes, Eleanor too overwhelmed by the landscape to form coherent thoughts. The town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling grassland that seemed to stretch forever. The creek Samuel had mentioned ran alongside the road, its water so clear she could see smooth stones on the bottom, and the morning sun turned the surface into liquid silver. It's so big, she finally said. In Boston, you could walk for an hour and still be surrounded by buildings and people. Here, it feels like the sky goes on forever. It does at first, Samuel agreed. When I was 13, it terrified me. All this space, all this emptiness, I felt like I might just blow away in the wind. He glanced at her. But my mother said something that helped. She said the land isn't empty. It's full of possibility. Every inch of it is waiting for someone to decide what it could become. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Samuel's voice went soft with memory. She was a school teacher back in Pennsylvania, educated and refined like you. My father used to joke that he'd married above his station, but she never complained about the hard work or the isolation. She'd sit on our porch in the evening and say, Samuel, we're building something that will outlast us. That's worth more than comfort. Eleanor studied his profile as he drove, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of his parents, the grief that still lived in the corners of his eyes. How long has it been since you lost them? 2 years last April, Prairie fever swept through the territory that spring. We lost 14 people in the valley, including both my parents within a week of each other. He paused, hands steady on the reins. The ranch was their dream, their legacy. Some days, keeping it going feels like the only way to honor what they built. That's a heavy burden to carry alone. It is, he admitted. That's part of why I placed the advertisement. I tried managing on my own for a year, but the loneliness... He trailed off, then seemed to gather himself. But I didn't want just anyone. I wanted someone who could understand what we'd be building together. Someone who could see past the hardship to the possibility underneath. The road began to climb, and Eleanor gripped the edge of her seat as the wagon bounced over increasingly rough terrain. True to his word, Samuel had warned her, but the reality of it still made her heart race. "There's the boundary marker," Samuel said, pointing to a cairn of stacked stones beside the road. "Everything from here to the foothills is heartland. My father built that marker the day we finalized the deed. He wanted something permanent, something that would still be standing when his grandchildren's grandchildren rode past." Eleanor felt the weight of that statement. Grandchildren. The implicit future stretching ahead, built on the foundation of decisions made today. The valley opened up before them, and despite her nervousness, Eleanor caught her breath. The land rolled in gentle waves toward distant mountains, with the creek cutting a silver ribbon through grassland that shifted from green to gold in the morning light. Scattered pine trees provided shade and shelter, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, their rust-colored bodies moving like slow clouds across the landscape. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. Samuel's face lit with unmistakable pride. "Wait until you see it in summer when the wildflowers bloom, or fall when the aspens turn gold. Wait until winter when snow covers everything and it's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat." He paused. "Sorry, I'm doing it again, getting carried away." "Don't apologize. It's good to see someone love their work." The ranch house came into view as they rounded a bend, a sturdy structure of logs and stone that sat on a slight rise overlooking the valley. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides and windows that caught the morning sun. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see a vegetable garden fenced off to one side, though it looked somewhat neglected. "My mother's garden," Samuel said, following her gaze. "I try to keep it going, but I'm better with cattle than vegetables. Most of what's growing there now is whatever was stubborn enough to survive my incompetence." He helped her down from the wagon, and Eleanor took a moment to steady herself. This was it. The place that might become her home. The life she might agree to share. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders. "Come on," Samuel said gently. "I'll show you around." The inside of the house surprised her even more than the exterior. She'd expected rough bachelor quarters, perhaps a single room with minimal furniture and maximum chaos. Instead, she found a spacious main room with a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture that showed signs of careful maintenance, and windows that flooded the space with light. The kitchen area was organized and clean, with copper pots hanging from hooks and shelves lined with preserves and dry goods. "You keep a tidy house," she said, unable to hide her surprise. Samuel looked slightly embarrassed. "My mother drilled certain things into me. A cluttered house makes a cluttered mind," she used to say. "Besides, I'm here alone most of the time. Seemed foolish to live like an animal when a little effort keeps things civilized." He led her through the house, pointing out the main bedroom where his parents had slept, the smaller room that had been his, and then up a narrow staircase to the loft space above. "I thought this could be, He hesitated. "Well, I fixed it up as a separate room. Private space, if you wanted it. At least at first, until we—" He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. "I'm making a mess of this." Eleanor understood what he was trying to say, and the thoughtfulness behind it made her throat tight. "You're giving me the choice of when and how, not just whether." "Yes, exactly that." The loft room was small but charming, with a dormer window that looked out over the valley and a bed frame that appeared to be newly built. A small dresser stood in one corner, and someone, Samuel she assumed, had placed a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. "The flowers were probably a foolish touch," Samuel said quickly. "Mrs. Brennan suggested it, and I thought, Well, I wanted you to know that I'd prepared for you, that I'd thought about what you might need. Eleanor crossed to the window, looking out at the sweeping vista of land and sky. From here, she could see the full scope of the ranch, the barn and outbuildings, the corrals with horses moving inside them, the creek winding through the valley, and beyond it all, the mountains rising like sentinels against the impossibly blue sky. "It's extraordinary," she whispered. Samuel came to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "My father used to say that every morning when you look out at land like this, you have to make a choice. You can see the work it requires and feel burdened, or you can see the potential it holds and feel inspired. Most days I try to choose inspiration." They stood there in silence, both looking out at the valley, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just land, it was a canvas, empty and waiting. The garden could be restored and expanded. The house could be filled with life and warmth. The lonely cowboy beside her could become a partner, maybe even a friend, possibly something more. "Show me the rest," she said. Samuel's whole face brightened. "Really?" "Really. If I'm considering this life, I should understand all of it, not just the pretty views from windows." They spent the next hour touring the property. Samuel showed her the barn where he kept his horses, introducing each one by name and personality quirk. There was Thunder, the big roan gelding who was steady and reliable but had a tendency to steal carrots from pockets. Sage, the gray mare who was smarter than most people I know and twice as stubborn. And a young bay colt named Copper, who'd been born that spring and still hadn't quite figured out his own legs. "Do you ride?" Samuel asked as he ran his hand along Sage's neck. "I did as a girl, but it's been years, and the horses in Boston were nothing like these." "Sage would be perfect for you to start with. She's patient and smooth-gaited, and she's clever enough to take care of a rider who's still learning." He looked at Eleanor hopefully. "We could start lessons if you'd like. Being able to ride out here is more than recreation. It's practical necessity." The chickens came next, a motley flock that scattered as they approached the coop. Samuel explained his system for collecting eggs and protecting the birds from predators, showing her the sturdy construction of the coop with what she recognized as justifiable pride. "Built this myself last year after a fox got into the old one. Lost half my flock in one night." He shook his head at the memory. "Won't make that mistake again." They walked to the creek, where Samuel explained his irrigation plans for expanding the cultivated land. He showed her the root cellar where supplies were stored to stay cool, the smokehouse for preserving meat, and the workshop where he repaired tools and tack. "It's a lot to manage," Eleanor said, somewhat overwhelmed. "It is," Samuel agreed, "but it's manageable with two people working together. My parents did it, and they started with less than what we have now. The house was smaller, the herd was maybe 30 head, and they had to build almost everything from scratch." He paused, looking back at the ranch house. "They proved it could be done." Eleanor noticed how he kept saying we and together, how he framed everything as a partnership rather than her serving his established life. It was a subtle thing, but it mattered. Martha's basket beckoned as the sun climbed higher, and they settled on the porch to eat. Samuel had brought out 2 chairs, positioning them so they could look out over the valley while they talked. "Tell me about the day-to-day reality," Eleanor said as she spread cheese on bread. "Not the grand vision, but the actual work. What would my life look like if I agreed to this?" Samuel appreciated the directness. "Mornings start early, around dawn. The animals need tending first. Chickens fed, eggs collected, horses turned out to pasture, or kept in depending on the work planned. Breakfast is usually simple because there's always something that needs immediate attention. Then it depends on the season and what's pressing. Spring means calving and branding. Summer is haying and maintaining fences. Fall is roundup and preparing for winter. Winter is just surviving and making sure the animals do the same. And the household work? Cooking, preserving food, maintaining the house, managing supplies, keeping accounts." He ticked items off on his fingers. "My mother also made our clothes, traded eggs and butter with the neighbors, and kept detailed records of everything, breeding schedules, expenses, weather patterns. She said information was just as valuable as muscle when it came to running a successful ranch." "I can keep accounts," Eleanor said. "My father trained me in bookkeeping, and I can sew, though I'm not particularly skilled at it." "That's more than I can do. I can barely sew a button back on." Samuel smiled. "See? Already you'd be contributing skills I don't have." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving in Colorado. There was something peaceful about sitting on this porch, looking out at this land with this quiet man beside her who asked for partnership rather than demanding submission. "Can I ask you something personal?" Samuel said eventually. "Yes." "Why did you really answer my advertisement? I know you said your father died in debt and your relatives made things difficult, but there must have been other options. Teaching, perhaps, or work as a governess." Eleanor set down her bread, choosing her words carefully. "My cousin's husband made it clear that if I stayed in their household, there would be expectations. He suggested that a young woman living on charity should be grateful for any attention she received." She met Samuel's eyes. "When he cornered me in the pantry and tried to kiss me, I knew I couldn't stay. Not safely." Samuel's jaw tightened and his hands clenched into fists before he deliberately relaxed them. "I'm sorry you had to experience that. And I'm sorry that my advertisement seemed like your best option, because that suggests how limited your choices were." "But it was the best option," Eleanor said firmly. "Not because it was the only one, but because your letters suggested you saw marriage as a partnership, because you seemed to value honesty over illusion, because you wrote about respect and shared purpose rather than romance and possession." My mother's influence again. She used to say that romance was the sugar coating, but respect was the medicine that actually healed and sustained. He looked out at the valley. My father respected her mind as much as he loved her face. They worked together on every decision, argued when they disagreed, and made each other better. That's what I want. That's what I'm offering, if you'll have it. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "You make it sound so simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy. My parents argued plenty. There were times they drove each other half crazy with frustration. But they never stopped seeing each other as equals, never stopped believing they were on the same side." He turned to look at her. "I can't promise it'll be easy, Eleanor. I can't promise you won't have days when you regret coming here. But I can promise that I'll respect you, listen to you, and work alongside you to build something worth having. Can I ask you something now?" "Of course." "Ruby Cassidy, was there ever anything between you?" Samuel sighed. "Honest answer?" She made her interest clear about a year ago. "I turned her down as gently as I could, but Ruby's the kind of woman who sees rejection as a challenge rather than an answer. There was never anything between us, and there never will be. But she's angry about it, and I suspect she'll try to make trouble." "Why tell me this?" "Because I don't want secrets between us. Because if we're going to build trust, it has to start with honesty." He held her gaze. "I want you to know exactly what you're getting into, including the complications." They spent the afternoon walking the property, with Samuel pointing out boundary markers and explaining his plans for expansion. He wanted to add another barn, improve the irrigation system, and possibly acquire the adjacent land if the current owner ever decided to sell. "It's ambitious," Eleanor said. "It has to be. Standing still out here means falling behind. The ranchers who succeed are the ones who plan ahead, who save during good years to survive the bad ones, who adapt when circumstances change." He smiled. "My father used to say that the West rewards the bold but buries the reckless. The trick is knowing the difference." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Samuel drove Eleanor back toward town. The return journey felt different than the morning ride, less fraught with anxiety, more weighted with possibility. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked as they approached Red River Crossing. "That's up to you. If you want more time to think, take it. If you want to visit the ranch again, come whenever you'd like. If you want to call the whole thing off and book passage back to Boston, I'll help you arrange it. No questions asked and no hard feelings." "You'd really do that? Even though you paid for my passage out here?" "Eleanor, I brought you here with a promise of choice. I'm not going to trap you with financial obligation." His voice was firm. "If you decide this isn't for you, that's your right. I'd rather be alone on a ranch than share it with someone who feels like a prisoner." They reached the boarding house as the evening shadows stretched long across the street. Samuel helped her down from the wagon, and this time the touch of his hand felt familiar, rather than strange. "Thank you for today," Eleanor said, "for showing me everything honestly, for not trying to make it seem easier than it is. Thank you for giving it a chance." He hesitated, then added, "Will you come to church tomorrow? I go most Sundays, and it would give you a chance to meet more of the community, see what kind of neighbors you'd have." "I'd like that." Samuel tipped his hat, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'll come by in the morning then. Service starts at 10. Eleanor watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing into the gathering dusk, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel again after leaving Boston: anticipation for tomorrow. Martha was waiting in the parlor when Eleanor entered, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. "Well, what did you think of the Hart Ranch?" "It's beautiful, overwhelming, but beautiful." "Samuel's a good man," Martha said, not looking up from her knitting. "Lost and lonely since his parents died, but good to his core. He'll treat you right if you give him the chance." "I'm beginning to see that." "But?" Martha's needles paused. "But I'm still terrified. What if I'm not strong enough for this life? What if I fail him, or the ranch, or myself?" Martha finally looked up, her gray eyes sharp but kind. "Dear girl, we're all terrified. Every woman in this town came here scared half to death, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The difference between those who stayed and those who left wasn't strength, it was stubbornness. Deciding that since you'd come this far, you might as well see it through." Eleanor thought about that as she climbed the stairs to her room. Stubbornness she had in abundance. It had gotten her through her father's death and her cousin's household. Perhaps it would be enough to get her through this too. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, with a crispness to the air that suggested autumn wasn't far off. Eleanor dressed in her best remaining dress, a dove-gray silk that had seen better days but still maintained a certain elegance, and pinned her cameo brooch at her throat. If she was going to be presented to the community as Samuel Hart's intended, she wanted to look the part. Samuel arrived precisely at 9:30, driving a different wagon than yesterday. This one clearly reserved for town trips, cleaner and better maintained. He dressed up too, she noticed, in a black suit that was slightly worn at the cuffs, but well fitted, with a string tie and polished boots. "You look lovely," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her flush with pleasure. "You clean up rather well yourself." The church was already filling when they arrived, and Eleanor felt every eye in the building turn to watch them enter. Samuel kept his hand light at her elbow, guiding her to a pew about halfway back. Not so prominent as to be presumptuous, but not so retiring as to hide their presence. "Samuel Hart, good to see you." An older man with kind eyes extended his hand as they settled. "And this must be Miss Price. Welcome to Red River Crossing. I'm Reverend Holt." "Thank you, Reverend. We're glad to have you. Growing communities need new blood, new ideas," he smiled. "I hope you'll feel at home here." Other introductions followed in a blur. The Henderson family from the general store, Tom Chen, the blacksmith, and his wife May, young families with small children, older couples who'd been in the territory for decades. Most were welcoming, though Eleanor caught a few speculative looks and heard whispers following in their wake. Ruby Cassidy arrived late, sweeping into the church with dramatic flair and taking a seat directly across the aisle from Samuel and Eleanor. Her dress was more suited to the saloon than Sunday service, cut lower and tighter than propriety suggested, and her hair was elaborately styled. She caught Eleanor's eye and smiled, the expression more challenge than greeting. Samuel either didn't notice or chose to ignore her, his attention focused on Reverend Holt as the service began. Eleanor found herself oddly comforted by the familiar rhythms of worship, the hymns, the prayers, the sermon that balanced fire with compassion. Some things remained constant, even on the frontier. After the service, the congregation spilled out onto the church lawn, clustering in groups to exchange news and gossip. Samuel introduced Eleanor to more people, and she did her best to remember names and faces while fielding questions about Boston and her journey west. "How are you finding Colorado?" asked Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with a warm smile and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "It's very different from what I'm used to, but beautiful in its own way." Different is an understatement, I'd say. This came from a thin woman whose name Eleanor couldn't recall. "Takes a certain kind of person to make it out here. Not everyone has what it takes." The implied question hung in the air. Did Eleanor have what it took? Before she could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. Leave the poor girl alone, Margaret. She just arrived. Doctor. Kate Morrison stepped into the circle, her dark eyes assessing Eleanor with professional interest. Miss Price, I'm Kate Morrison. I run the medical practice in town. The doctor who also happens to be a woman, Eleanor said. Samuel mentioned you. Did he now? Kate's mouth quirked. Usually men in this territory pretend female doctors don't exist. Point in Samuel's favor that he acknowledges reality. Kate studied in Philadelphia, Samuel added, best medical training in the country. And yet I ended up in Colorado Territory, patching up cowboys and delivering babies. Kate's tone was dry but not bitter, though I suppose that's more interesting than the comfortable Philadelphia practice my father envisioned for me. Eleanor found herself warming to the other woman immediately. Here was someone else who'd chosen the harder path, who'd faced down convention and made a place for herself anyway. Perhaps we could have tea sometime, Eleanor ventured, if you're not too busy. I'd like that. Fair warning, though. I'm terrible at idle chat. I tend to ask invasive questions about health and well-being. I'll consider myself warned. Ruby Cassidy chose that moment to approach, her hips swaying as she crossed the lawn. Well, well, the happy couple surrounded by admirers. Her tone was light, but her eyes were hard. Samuel, you didn't tell me your mail-order bride was so refined. However will she manage the rough ranch life? Miss Cassidy, Samuel's voice went flat. Eleanor is managing just fine. Oh, I'm sure. For now. Ruby turned to Eleanor with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You should know, dear, that ranching isn't all pretty sunsets and mountain views. It's mud and blood and endless work. It breaks women who weren't born to it. Then I suppose I'll have to be stronger than I look, Eleanor replied evenly, refusing to be baited. Ruby laughed, the sound sharp. Spirit. I like that. You'll need it. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping. But spirit only gets you so far. When winter comes and you're snowed in for weeks, when the loneliness starts to eat at you, when you realize you've tied yourself to a man and a life you barely know, that's when the real test begins. Ruby, that's enough. Kate Morrison's voice cut through the tension. Take your drama elsewhere. Ruby straightened, her smile turning brittle. Just offering friendly advice, Doctor. No need to get defensive. She drifted away, leaving a wake of uncomfortable silence. Don't let her get to you, Kate said quietly. She's angry about things that have nothing to do with you. She's angry because I said no, Samuel said bluntly, and because I sent for Eleanor. Ruby sees it as a personal rejection, which I suppose it is. She's not entirely wrong, though, Eleanor said slowly. About the challenges, I mean. Winter, loneliness, the question of whether I'm suited for this life. Those are real concerns, Kate acknowledged, but they're not insurmountable. Every woman here has faced them and survived. Some thrived. The question isn't whether you'll face hardship. You will. The question is whether you'll have support when you do. Eleanor looked at Samuel, who was watching her with quiet concern. Will I? Have support, I mean? Yes, he said simply. I promise you that. The gathering was breaking up, families heading home for Sunday dinner. Samuel helped Eleanor back into the wagon, and they rode in thoughtful silence for a few minutes. I'm sorry about Ruby, he finally said. I should have warned you she might try something like that. It's all right. She said what a lot of people are probably thinking, that I'm a city girl playing at frontier life, that I'll fail when things get hard. Do you believe that? Eleanor considered the question seriously. I don't know yet. I know I'm afraid. I know this is harder than anything I've attempted before. But I also know that I've survived things I didn't think I could survive. Maybe that counts for something. It counts for everything, Samuel said. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. They'd reached the boarding house, but neither moved to end the conversation. I need more time, Eleanor said. To think, to be sure. Take it. No pressure. But not too much time. It's not fair to you to leave things uncertain indefinitely. Samuel smiled. How about this? Give yourself 2 weeks. Visit the ranch when you want. Ask me any questions you have. Meet more people in town. At the end of 2 weeks, make your decision. Yes or no, stay or go. Whatever you decide, I'll accept it. 2 weeks, Eleanor repeated. That seems reasonable. And Eleanor, whatever you decide, thank you for giving me a real chance. After he left, Eleanor sat in her room and thought about everything she'd learned over the past 2 days. Samuel Hart was patient, kind, honest, and hardworking. The ranch was beautiful but demanding. The community was mixed but generally welcoming. The life would be hard but possibly rewarding. She thought about Ruby's warning about winter loneliness, about Kate's matter-of-fact acknowledgement of hardship, about Martha's assertion that stubbornness mattered more than strength. And she thought about Boston, about the life she'd left behind, about the cousin's husband whose hands had grabbed at her in the pantry, about the social expectations that had trapped her in a cage of propriety and dependence. 2 weeks to decide between safety and risk, between the familiar and the unknown, between the life she'd planned and the life that might be possible. Eleanor pulled out her journal and began to write, trying to capture her thoughts before they slipped away. The sun moved across the sky outside her window, painting the mountains in shifting shades of color, and she wrote until her hand cramped and the light began to fail. 2 weeks. She could manage 2 weeks. The 2 weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Eleanor with its naturalness. Samuel arrived each morning around 9, after he'd finished his early ranch chores, and they spent their days in a careful dance of discovery, learning each other's rhythms, testing the boundaries of what might become partnership. On Monday, he taught her to ride. Sage proved as patient as promised, standing still while Eleanor struggled with the unfamiliar side saddle Samuel had borrowed from Mrs. Henderson. Her legs trembled with effort, her back ached from the unaccustomed posture, and she was certain she looked ridiculous. But Samuel never laughed, only offered quiet corrections and steady encouragement. "Loosen your grip on the reins," he said, walking beside her as Sage plodded in gentle circles around the corral. "She's not going to run off with you. Trust her to know her job." "That's the problem," Eleanor admitted through gritted teeth. "I don't trust easily." "I've noticed." There was warmth in his voice, not judgment. But trust is like muscle. It gets stronger with practice. By the end of that first lesson, Eleanor was exhausted and sore, but also strangely exhilarated. She'd stayed on the horse. She hadn't fallen, hadn't panicked, hadn't failed. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. Tuesday brought rain, the first Eleanor had experienced in Colorado. It wasn't like Boston rain, soft and gray and melancholy. This was a fierce mountain storm that rolled across the valley with theatrical drama, turning the sky black and the streets to rivers of mud. Eleanor stood at her window watching lightning fracture the sky, feeling small and awed, and strangely alive. Samuel appeared at the boarding house door around noon, dripping wet despite his oilskin coat, carrying a wooden box under one arm. "Can't ride in this," he said cheerfully. "Thought I'd bring the ranch to you instead." The box contained his mother's account books, 5 years of meticulous records documenting every aspect of ranch life. Income from cattle sales, expenses for supplies and equipment, breeding records for the horses, weather patterns and their effects on grazing, even notes on which neighbors were reliable for trading and which required cash payment. They spread the books across Martha's dining table, and Samuel walked Eleanor through the system his mother had developed. The numbers told a story: lean years and prosperous ones, careful saving and calculated risks, the slow but steady growth of a dream made tangible. "Your mother was brilliant," Eleanor said, tracing a column of figures that showed how profit from a good cattle sale had been divided between immediate needs and long-term improvements. "This is better bookkeeping than most Boston businesses manage." She said that information was power, especially out here where you can't afford mistakes. Samuel pointed to a notation in the margin. "See this? That year we lost 30 head to a late spring blizzard. Could have bankrupted us. But because she'd kept careful records, she knew exactly which expenditures could be delayed and which couldn't. We survived because she planned for disaster. And you've kept the same system?" "Tried to. I'm not as thorough as she was. Numbers aren't my strength." He looked at her hopefully. "But if you have a head for this sort of thing..." Eleanor felt something click into place. Here was something concrete she could contribute, a skill that matched a need. "I could help with this." I'd like to, actually. My father trained me in bookkeeping. He said a woman should understand money even if society pretended she shouldn't. He sounds like he was a smart man. He was. He just wasn't a careful one. The old bitterness crept into her voice. All the intelligence in the world doesn't matter if you make foolish investments and trust the wrong people. Samuel was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing the edge of one of the ledgers. Is that what you're afraid of? That I'll turn out to be a fool like he was? That you'll invest yourself in this life only to watch it crumble? The directness of the question stole her breath. Perhaps. I don't know. I just know that trust is expensive, and I've already paid too high a price for it once. Then I'll have to earn it properly, Samuel said. Show you through actions, not just words, that I'm steady, that I plan ahead, that I won't gamble what we build together on foolish dreams. They spent the rest of the afternoon going over the books while rain drummed on the roof and thunder rolled across the valley. Samuel explained his plans for the next 5 years: modest expansion, careful breeding to improve the herd, diversification into sheep if the market supported it. Nothing reckless, nothing that risked everything on one outcome. My father used to say that the ranchers who failed were the ones who got greedy, Samuel told her, who borrowed too much, expanded too fast, bet everything on one good season. The ones who succeeded were the ones who moved slow, saved their profits, and built on solid foundation. That's the opposite of how most men think, Eleanor observed. Maybe, but I watched my parents build this ranch over 15 years, one careful decision at a time. I'm not going to dishonor that by being stupid now. Wednesday was clear and bright, and Samuel took Eleanor to meet the neighbors. The Johnsons ran a smaller ranch about 3 miles west with 5 children ranging from toddler to teenager. Mrs. Johnson was heavily pregnant with number 6, her hands red from laundry and her smile genuinely warm. Thank God, another woman, she said, practically pulling Eleanor into her kitchen. I'm drowning in males. Even the cats had boy kittens this spring. I need female conversation or I'll go mad. Her kitchen was chaos. Children underfoot, laundry hanging from every available surface, a pot of something indefinable bubbling on the stove. But there was laughter too, and warmth, and the kind of comfortable disorder that spoke of a life fully lived. Don't let the mess scare you, Mrs. Johnson said, shoving a pile of mending off a chair so Eleanor could sit. It's not always this bad, just most of the time. She poured coffee without asking if Eleanor wanted any. Samuel's a good man, lost and sad since his folks died, but good. You could do worse. Everyone keeps telling me that. Because it's true. And because we're all desperate for you to stay. Mrs. Johnson's expression turned serious. We need more women out here, Eleanor. Not just for the men, but for each other. Winter gets long and lonely. It helps to know there's another woman within riding distance who understands what you're going through. The eldest Johnson daughter, a serious girl of about 14, brought in eggs from the chicken coop. She reminded Eleanor achingly of herself at that age, trying so hard to be useful, to be grown, to be enough. Mary helps me with everything, Mrs. Johnson said proudly. I don't know what I'd do without her. The younger ones are wild as March hares, but Mary's got an old soul. Mary ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise, but Eleanor saw the pleasure in her eyes. Later, as they were leaving, the girl pressed a small basket into Eleanor's hands. Cookies, she whispered. I made them myself. Mama says every bride needs something sweet for courage. The simple kindness made Eleanor's throat tight. Thank you, Mary. They smell wonderful. On the ride back to town, Samuel was quiet, letting Eleanor process what she'd seen. Finally, she spoke. Mrs. Johnson seemed exhausted. She is. 6 children in 15 years, running a household, helping with ranch work. It's hard. Samuel paused. But I've never heard her complain. She and Johnson seemed genuinely happy together. Happy or just making the best of it? Does it matter? If making the best of it leads to happiness, isn't that the same thing? Eleanor thought about that. I suppose it depends on whether you had a choice in the first place. You have a choice, Samuel reminded her gently. That's what these 2 weeks are for. Thursday brought Dr. Kate Morrison to the boarding house, carrying her medical bag and a frank expression. Martha showed her up to Eleanor's room with a knowing smile. I promised you tea and invasive questions, Kate said, settling into the room's single chair while Eleanor perched on the bed. I'm here to deliver both. Over tea that Martha had sent up, Kate asked questions that would have been shocking in Boston society. Had Eleanor's monthly courses been regular? Any history of illness in her family? What did she know about preventing conception? And did she want to know more? Eleanor's face burned, but Kate's manner was so matter-of-fact that embarrassment seemed foolish. This was medical knowledge, practical information that every woman needed but few were willing to discuss openly. I'm telling you this because you need to know, Kate said bluntly. Pregnancy and childbirth are dangerous, especially out here where help might be hours away in an emergency. You should understand what you're risking if you marry Samuel. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to make sure you make an informed decision. Kate's dark eyes were serious. I like Samuel. He's one of the few men in this territory who treats me like a real doctor instead of an aberration. I want him to be happy, but I also believe women deserve the truth about what they're getting into. And what am I getting into? Kate was silent for a long moment. A hard life that might break you. Or it might make you stronger than you ever imagined. I've seen both outcomes, sometimes in the same woman at different stages. She leaned forward. But I've also seen what happens to women who stay in situations where they have no power, no choice, no voice. That breaks them too, just more slowly. So either way we risk breaking. Either way life is hard. The question is whether you want to face that hardness on your own terms or someone else's. After Kate left, Eleanor lay on her bed and thought about power and choice and the different ways a life could break a person. Her mother had broken slowly in Boston, trapped in a marriage to a charming man who couldn't manage money, watching their security erode while maintaining the fiction of respectability. She died when Eleanor was 19, worn down by worry and disappointment. Eleanor had sworn she'd never follow that path. But was trading one trap for another really freedom or just a different cage? Friday morning, Samuel took her to the high meadow. They rode for over an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills, until the ranch house was a toy building far below and the valley spread out like a painted canvas. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow, purple asters, yellow arnica, white columbine, and the air was so clear it almost hurt to breathe. My father proposed to my mother here, Samuel said, helping Eleanor down from Sage. He said he wanted to show her the most beautiful place he'd found, because she deserved to make her decision surrounded by beauty. They sat on a fallen log, and Samuel unpacked the lunch he'd brought. Bread and cheese and apples. Simple food that tasted extraordinary in the mountain air. Below them, the valley stretched endlessly, and Eleanor could see other ranches scattered across the landscape, each one representing someone else's dream, someone else's gamble on this wild country. Tell me about your parents' courtship, she said. How did they meet? Samuel smiled at the memory. She was teaching at the school in his hometown, and he was the son of the local banker. His family expected him to take over the bank, marry a merchant's daughter, live a respectable and boring life. But my mother had different ideas. What kind of ideas? She'd read everything she could about the Western territories. She believed in manifest destiny, in the idea that America's future lay in expansion and opportunity. She told my father that he could either spend his life counting other people's money, or he could use that knowledge to build something of his own. Samuel's voice went soft with affection. She was fierce, my mother. When she believed in something, she was unstoppable. And your father just agreed? Not at first. They argued about it for 2 years. She was ready to come west alone if necessary. Finally, my father realized he'd rather risk everything with her than live safely without her. Samuel looked at Eleanor. That's the thing about real partnership. It requires both people to be brave. I'm not sure I'm brave enough. You got on a stagecoach and traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. That's brave. That was desperation. Maybe, but desperation that leads to action is just courage by another name. He pulled something from his pocket, a small leather journal worn at the edges. This was my mother's, her diary from their first year here. I thought you might want to read it. Eleanor took the journal with reverent hands. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed but still legible. She opened it at random and read, Today I cried for an hour over burned bread and scorched laundry. Then I dried my tears, fixed what could be fixed, and tried again. Out here, There's no one to rescue you but yourself. She was honest about the hardship, Samuel said, but she was also honest about the satisfaction. Keep reading. There are good parts, too. That evening, Eleanor sat in her room and read the entire journal from start to finish. She read about frozen water buckets and summer heat that made the house an oven. She read about loneliness so acute it felt like physical pain, and about the joy of watching their first garden produce vegetables, and about arguments with Samuel's father that ended in tears and reconciliation and stronger understanding. But mostly, she read about a woman who'd chosen her own path and then fought like hell to make it work. Saturday was market day in Red River Crossing, and the town filled with ranchers and farmers bringing goods to trade and sell. Samuel had business at the general store, and Eleanor wandered the makeshift stalls with Martha Brennan, observing the community in its most vibrant form. She bought yarn from a sheep rancher's wife, who gave her a knowing smile. "Starting your trousseau?" "I haven't decided yet," Eleanor said honestly. "Well, when you do, you'll need warm socks. Winters here will freeze your toes off if you're not prepared." At the vegetable stall, Mrs. Johnson waved her over. "Eleanor, try these tomatoes, best crop we've had in 3 years." Eleanor bought tomatoes she didn't need and found herself drawn into a conversation about preserving methods with 3 other ranch wives. They swapped recipes and advice with the easy camaraderie of women who understood each other's challenges, and Eleanor felt something unfamiliar, the possibility of community, of belonging. Ruby Cassidy appeared in the late afternoon, her presence like a cold wind through the warm market atmosphere. She paused at Eleanor's elbow, close enough that her perfume was overwhelming. "Still here, I see. Thought you might have run back to Boston by now." "The 2 weeks aren't up yet," Eleanor replied evenly. "Ah, yes, the trial period. How modern." Ruby's smile was sharp. "Tell me, what happens when you realize that all of this—" She gestured at the market, the town, the mountains beyond. "Isn't enough to fill the emptiness? When you wake up one morning and understand that you've tied yourself to a life that will grind you down until there's nothing left of the person you used to be?" "Is that what happened to you?" Eleanor asked quietly. For just a moment, something flickered in Ruby's eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. Then the mask slammed back into place. "I came here for love too, followed a man who promised me the world and delivered a saloon job and broken promises. The difference is, I'm not pretending anymore that this place is anything but what it is, hard, unforgiving, and utterly indifferent to our dreams." "Then why stay?" Ruby laughed, the sound brittle. "Because leaving requires money I don't have and courage I spent long ago. So I stay and I survive and I warn foolish girls like you that romance and possibility are pretty lies we tell ourselves." She walked away before Eleanor could respond, leaving a wake of uncomfortable truth. Because Ruby wasn't entirely wrong. This place was hard and unforgiving. Dreams did die here, ground down by weather and isolation and the sheer relentless difficulty of frontier life. Samuel found her a few minutes later, standing frozen in the middle of the market crowd. "Eleanor? What's wrong?" "Ruby said something that got under my skin." "What did she say?" Eleanor repeated the conversation, watching Samuel's expression shift from concern to something deeper. Not anger, but a kind of weary sadness. "She's not wrong about the hardship," he said finally. "This life breaks some people. I won't lie about that. But she's wrong about one thing. We do have choice in how we face it. Ruby chose bitterness. My mother chose strength. My father chose partnership." He paused. "I'm choosing hope. The question is what you'll choose." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Ruby's words echoing against Samuel's, her mother's choices shadowing her own. Tomorrow was Sunday, the start of her second week. 7 more days until decision time. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Sunday's church service felt different. Eleanor was no longer the new curiosity, but an accepted presence, and people nodded greetings without the speculative stares of the previous week. Reverend Holt's sermon was about faith as action rather than feeling, about Abraham leaving his home for an uncertain promised land. "Faith requires movement," the Reverend said, his voice carrying across the small church. "Staying comfortable isn't faith. It's just fear with better furniture." Real faith is saying yes to God's call even when you can't see the destination, trusting that the journey itself will reveal what you need to know. Eleanor felt the words like an arrow aimed directly at her heart. Wasn't that exactly her situation? Being asked to move forward without guarantees, to trust that the act of choosing would somehow clarify the choice itself? After the service, Samuel drove her out to the ranch again. They'd fallen into an easy pattern now, spending Sundays at the ranch, where the quiet and privacy allowed for deeper conversations than the boarding house parlor permitted. But today felt different. There was an electricity in the air between them, an awareness that time was running short and decisions loomed. They sat on the porch, and Samuel finally voiced what they'd both been avoiding. "You've been here 10 days now. How are you feeling about everything?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "I'm not as afraid as I was. The life doesn't seem as impossible. The people are kinder than I expected. The land is more beautiful than any description could capture. But I still don't know if I'm strong enough, if I have what it takes." She turned to face him. "Ruby said something that haunts me, that I'll wake up one morning and realize I've given up everything I was for a life that's grinding me down. What if she's right?" Samuel was quiet for a long time, his eyes on the valley below. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "When my parents died, I had to decide whether to stay here or sell everything and go back east. The easy choice would have been leaving, taking the money, starting over somewhere safer and more comfortable. But I stayed. Why? Because leaving would have meant their deaths erased everything they built. Because this ranch was their dream made real, and abandoning it felt like abandoning them." He paused. "But also because I realized something. The life we build matters more than the comfort we maintain. My parents didn't come here for ease, they came to create something meaningful, to leave a mark on the world that would outlast them. And you think I could do the same? I think you already did, just by getting on that stagecoach. I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for, but I also think—" He hesitated, then continued. "I think you're asking the wrong question." "What do you mean?" "You keep asking if you're strong enough to survive this life. But maybe the real question is whether this life is worth surviving for. Whether what we could build together would give your existence meaning and purpose beyond just enduring." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "How do I know that? How does anyone know?" "You don't. That's the leap of faith part." Samuel shifted to face her fully. "I can tell you what I know. I know that these past 10 days, this ranch has felt less lonely. I know that showing you my mother's journal and my father's account books didn't feel like sharing possessions. It felt like sharing myself. I know that when I think about the future now, I don't just see work and duty. I see conversations on this porch and arguments over account books and someone to share the sunset with when the day's work is done. Samuel, let me finish. I know I'm not offering romance or easy comfort. I know I'm asking you to take a tremendous risk with limited guarantees, but I'm also offering you something real, partnership, respect, the chance to build something meaningful together. And I hope, that might be worth the risk." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Eleanor looked out at the valley, at the land Samuel's parents had chosen, at the home they'd built with stubborn determination and mutual respect. She thought about her mother, slowly dying in Boston's refined comfort. She thought about Ruby, surviving but not thriving, trapped by her own bitterness. She thought about Mrs. Johnson's exhausted smile, and Kate Morrison's fierce independence, and Martha Brennan's quiet dignity. And she thought about who she wanted to become. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "A confession, I suppose." "All right." "When I got on that stagecoach in Boston, I was running away. From my cousin's husband, yes, but also from myself. From the person I'd become, passive, dependent, afraid of everything. I thought maybe distance would transform me, that Colorado would somehow make me brave." She laughed shakily. "But I'm learning that geography doesn't change who you are. You have to do that yourself." "And who do you want to be?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Someone who makes deliberate choices instead of accepting default options. Someone who builds instead of just endures. Someone who's strong enough to ask for help when she needs it, and brave enough to offer it when others do. She looked at Samuel. Someone worthy of partnership with a man like you. His expression softened. Eleanor, you're already that person. You just haven't recognized it yet. They sat in silence as the sun moved across the sky, both processing the weight of what had been said and what still needed to be decided. Finally, Samuel stood and offered his hand. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her behind the house to a small fenced plot she'd noticed before but never examined closely. Inside the fence were 2 wooden crosses, simple but well-maintained with wildflowers planted around them. My parents, Samuel said quietly. I come here every evening and tell them about my day. It probably sounds foolish. It sounds like love. I wanted you to meet them, in a way, to understand what kind of people they were, what kind of legacy they left. He knelt by the graves, and Eleanor followed his lead. Ma, Pa, this is Eleanor Price, the woman I told you about. I know you'd like her. She's smart like Ma was, and careful with numbers like Pa. She's brave even though she doesn't think so, and she's trying to decide if she can make a life here. Eleanor felt tears slide down her cheeks. There was something profoundly moving about this quiet man talking to his dead parents, including her in his grief and his hope. I think they'd want you to know, Samuel continued, still addressing the graves, that it's all right to be scared. They were scared too when they started, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. He stood and helped Eleanor to her feet, and they walked back to the house hand in hand, the first time they'd touched beyond practical assistance. His hand was warm and calloused and solid, and Eleanor found herself not wanting to let go. 4 more days, Samuel said as they reached the porch. Then you'll have your answer. What if I'm still uncertain? Then you take more time, or you say no. I mean, what I said, Eleanor, I want you to choose this freely or not at all. The week that followed felt both endless and too short. Monday brought another writing lesson, and Eleanor managed to trot without terror. Tuesday, she helped Martha with laundry and heard stories about the early days of Red River Crossing, when there were only 6 buildings and winter claimed 3 people who weren't prepared. Wednesday, Samuel taught her to shoot, patient while she jumped at the rifle's kick and missed the target by embarrassing margins. Thursday afternoon, Eleanor found herself in Mrs. Johnson's chaotic kitchen, helping prepare vegetables while the pregnant woman rested her swollen feet. You're going to say yes, aren't you? Mrs. Johnson said suddenly. Eleanor's hand stilled on the carrots she was peeling. I don't know yet. Yes, you do. You just haven't admitted it to yourself. Mrs. Johnson's expression was knowing. I recognize that look, fear and hope all tangled together. That's how I looked the week before I married Johnson. Were you scared? Terrified. I was 17, marrying a man 10 years older, moving to territory where the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. She smiled at the memory. I cried through the entire ceremony. Poor Johnson thought I was having regrets. But you weren't? No, I was grieving the girl I was and welcoming the woman I'd have to become. That's what marriage is out here. Transformation. You can't stay who you were and survive this life. You have to become someone stronger. That night, Eleanor pulled out her journal and wrote, Tomorrow is Friday. The next day I have to decide. I thought 2 weeks would be enough time to know for certain, but certainty seems like a luxury this life doesn't offer. Maybe faith isn't about being certain. Maybe it's about choosing anyway, trusting that the act of commitment itself will carry you through. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, and Eleanor woke with her decision made. She wasn't sure when it had happened. In her sleep, perhaps, or gradually over the past 2 weeks without her conscious awareness. But she knew with sudden clarity what her answer would be. Samuel arrived at 9 as usual, but Eleanor met him at the boarding house door before he could knock. Let's go to the ranch, she said. I want to talk somewhere private. The drive was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. The valley looked particularly beautiful today, the late summer light turning everything golden, and Eleanor drank in the sight like she was memorizing it. When they reached the ranch, Samuel helped her down from the wagon, but didn't immediately speak. He seemed to sense that she needed to find her own words, her own timing. They climbed the porch steps and stood at the railing, looking out over the land that would become her home. Eleanor's hands gripped the rail, steadying herself for what came next. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," she began, "about asking the wrong question. You were right. I've been so focused on whether I'm strong enough that I forgot to consider whether this life is worth being strong for." Samuel waited, barely breathing. "I thought about my mother, who died slowly in Boston, worn down by worrying about money and respectability and maintaining appearances. I thought about Ruby, who came here for love and stayed out of desperation. I thought about Kate, who chose this hard life deliberately because it gave her purpose." Eleanor turned to face him. "And I thought about your parents, who built something beautiful and lasting because they worked together." "Eleanor, let me finish. I'm not my mother. I'm not Ruby. I'm not even Kate, though I admire her tremendously. I'm just Eleanor Price, a woman who's terrified of making the wrong choice, but more terrified of making no choice at all." She took a deep breath. "So my answer is yes. I'll marry you. I'll try to build this life with you. And if I fail, at least it will be an active failure, not a passive surrender." Samuel's face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm deciding anyway." Eleanor smiled shakily. "Isn't that what faith is?" He reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. "I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure you don't regret this. I promise to be patient when you're frustrated, to listen when you're overwhelmed, to be the partner you deserve. And I promise to try, to learn, to adapt, to become the woman who can build this life alongside you." Eleanor squeezed his hands. "That's all I can offer, the promise to try." "That's everything," Samuel said. Then, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. The kiss was chaste, reverent, and somehow more intimate than passion would have been. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you for trusting me, for choosing us." They stood there on the porch, hands clasped, foreheads touching, as the Colorado afternoon stretched golden around them. In the distance, cattle lowed and birds sang, and the creek whispered its eternal song. The mountains stood silent witness to a promise made, a future chosen, a partnership begun. Eleanor thought about Abraham leaving his home for an uncertain promised land. She thought about her mother's slow death and Ruby's bitter survival. She thought about Samuel's parents and their stubborn determination to build something beautiful in a hard land. And she thought about the woman she might become, not overnight, not easily, but gradually, through choice and effort and the daily practice of courage. "When should we marry?" she asked. "Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, if you want. Or we could wait a few weeks, give you time to adjust to the idea." Eleanor considered. "A week? That gives me time to prepare without time to panic and change my mind." Samuel laughed, and the sound was pure relief and joy. "A week, then. I'll talk to Reverend Holt tomorrow." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans, practical discussions about moving Eleanor's belongings to the ranch, about what supplies she'd need, about how they'd divide the work and responsibilities. It was prosaic and unromantic, and exactly what Eleanor needed. Romance was lovely in theory, but partnership required planning. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Samuel drove Eleanor back to town. At the boarding house door, he caught her hand once more. "I know you're still scared," he said. "I know this doesn't feel certain or safe, but I want you to know that you've already taken the hardest step. Everything else from here is just details." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She went inside and climbed the stairs to her room, where she sat at the window and watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose and purple. In 7 days, she would marry Samuel Hart. In 7 days, her life would change irrevocably. In 7 days, the woman she was would begin the transformation into the woman she chose to become. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was exactly right. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of activity that left Eleanor little time for second thoughts, which was perhaps a mercy. Martha Brennan transformed into a benevolent general, marshaling the women of Red River Crossing into a force of practical efficiency that would have impressed any military commander. "A wedding needs proper preparation," Martha declared the morning after Eleanor's acceptance, already making lists before Eleanor had finished her breakfast. Dress, food, flowers, and you'll need at least a few proper household items to start with. No bride should arrive at her new home empty-handed. Mrs. Johnson appeared that afternoon with an armful of fabric. "My wedding dress," she said, spreading the cream-colored cotton across Martha's dining table. "I was thinner then, before 6 babies, but Kate Morrison is handy with alterations. We'll make it fit you perfectly." Eleanor ran her fingers over the simple but elegant fabric, touched beyond words. "I can't take your wedding dress." "You're not taking it. You're borrowing it. That's the way we do things out here. We share what we have because none of us have enough alone." Mrs. Johnson's expression was warm. "Besides, I like the idea of my dress getting another happy beginning. Lord knows it's spent enough years packed away in a trunk." Dr. Kate Morrison arrived with her sewing kit and a measuring tape, her approach to alterations as precise and clinical as her approach to medicine. She had Eleanor stand in her chemise while she pinned and tucked, her dark eyes assessing fit with professional detachment. "You've lost weight since leaving Boston," Kate observed. "The journey and the stress, most likely. We'll need to take this in more than I anticipated." "Is that a medical opinion or a personal observation?" "Both. You're healthy enough, but you're running on nerves and determination right now." Kate met her eyes in the mirror. "Once you're settled at the ranch, once the decision anxiety fades, you'll need to focus on building your strength. Ranch life requires stamina." "You sound like you're preparing me for battle." "In a way I am." Kate's expression was serious. "Marriage is the easy part, Eleanor. It's the daily living afterward that requires real courage. The endless work, the isolation, the times when you'll wonder why you chose this." She paused. "But also the satisfactions, the moments of beauty and connection that make the hardship worthwhile." Eleanor watched her reflection as Kate worked, seeing a woman who looked simultaneously familiar and foreign. The same face, the same eyes. But something fundamental had shifted. The Eleanor who'd stepped off the stagecoach 2 weeks ago had been running away. The Eleanor who would marry Samuel in 6 days was running toward something, even if she couldn't quite articulate what that something was. "Kate, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life instead of a comfortable practice in Philadelphia?" Kate's hands stilled on the fabric. "Every winter when my fingers are too cold to hold a scalpel properly. Every time I lose a patient I might have saved with better equipment. Every evening I spend alone in my rooms, knowing that Philadelphia would have offered companionship and cultural opportunities I'll never have here." "That's not very reassuring." "I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to be honest." Kate resumed pinning. "But I don't regret it. Because in Philadelphia, I would have been tolerated at best, patronized constantly, and never fully trusted with serious cases. Here, I'm the only doctor for 50 miles. People don't have the luxury of prejudice when their child is fevered or their husband has a broken leg. I'm needed here in a way I never would have been back east." "So the sacrifice is worth it?" "The sacrifice is necessary. That's different from worth." But Kate stepped back to assess her work. "Worth implies you're getting adequate compensation, but some things we do aren't about worth. They're about necessity, about who we need to become to live with ourselves." That night, Eleanor lay awake thinking about necessity versus worth, about the different kinds of sacrifice women made, about the distance between comfort and meaning. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the sky with a brilliance impossible in Boston, where city lights dimmed the heavens. Even the darkness was different here, deeper, vaster, somehow more honest about the nature of the universe. Sunday brought another church service, but this one had a different tenor. Reverend Holt announced the upcoming wedding from the pulpit, and the congregation erupted in smiles and whispered excitement. After the service, Eleanor found herself surrounded by well-wishers offering advice, blessings, and thinly veiled curiosity. "Marriage is about compromise," one older woman declared. "You give a little, he gives a little, and somehow it works out. Keep a good table and a peaceful home, and your husband will never stray," another added with sage certainty. "Don't let him think he's always right, even when he is," Mrs. Johnson said with a wink. "Men need to believe they're earning their peace, not being granted it." Samuel rescued her eventually, guiding her away from the well-meaning crowd with a hand at her elbow. "I'm sorry about that. Small towns love their rituals, and giving advice to brides is apparently one of them." "It's all right. They mean well." Eleanor glanced back at the church, where Ruby Cassidy stood on the steps, watching them with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. Though not everyone is pleased. Ruby will have to make her own peace with it. Samuel's voice was firm. This isn't about her, and it never was. They drove out to the ranch, where Samuel had been preparing for Eleanor's arrival with touching thoroughness. The loft room was fully furnished now, with curtains he'd clearly struggled to hang. They were slightly crooked but clean and serviceable. The main room had been scrubbed until it shone, and someone, probably Martha, had brought over fresh linens and towels. I wasn't sure how you'd want to arrange things, Samuel said, suddenly awkward. The bedroom situation, I mean. I thought we'd start with separate rooms and see how things develop naturally. No pressure, no expectations. Eleanor appreciated his consideration, even as part of her wondered if this was normal, if most couples began their marriages with such careful distance. But nothing about their situation was normal, and perhaps that was all right. Thank you for thinking of my comfort, she said. I know this arrangement isn't traditional. Traditional is overrated. Samuel smiled. My parents always said the best marriages are the ones where the couple makes their own rules based on mutual respect, not social expectation. They spent the afternoon going through his mother's kitchen supplies, with Samuel explaining the purpose of various items Eleanor didn't recognize. A Dutch oven for cooking over the fire, a butter churn that his mother had used weekly, jars and jars of preserved vegetables and fruits, some from his mother's last season, others that Samuel had managed himself with varying success. This one's pickles, he said, holding up a jar of something that might have been cucumbers once but now looked questionable. I'm not sure they're safe to eat. Ma made it look easy, but I couldn't quite get the brine right. We'll make new ones, Eleanor said. Mrs. Johnson promised to teach me her preserving methods. We, Samuel repeated softly. I like the sound of that. As evening approached, they sat on the porch and watched the light change across the valley. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer weighted with uncertainty but rich with possibility. Are you nervous about Saturday? Samuel asked. Terrified, Eleanor admitted, but not in the way I expected. I'm not afraid of marrying you anymore. I'm afraid of failing, of not being good enough at this life, of disappointing you, of proving Ruby right. Ruby's bitterness is her own burden, not yours. Samuel shifted to face her. And as for failing, Eleanor, we'll both fail at things. I'll burn dinner and forget important dates and say the wrong thing at the wrong time. You'll struggle with skills that take years to develop and get frustrated with the isolation and probably want to strangle me at least once a month. That's not failure. That's just being human. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just repeating what my parents taught me. His smile was sad. They had terrible fights sometimes. I remember hiding in the barn once while they shouted at each other about money and risk and whether to expand the herd. I thought surely they'd decided they hated each other. But then my father came to find me and he said, Samuel, fighting doesn't mean we don't love each other. It means we care enough to be honest about our disagreements. That stuck with me. Eleanor thought about her parents, who'd never fought openly, but had lived in a state of quiet, desperate tension. Perhaps honest argument was healthier than polite silence. Monday morning brought the first real challenge. Mrs. Johnson had organized the ranch wives to teach Eleanor essential skills, starting with bread making. 5 women descended on Martha's kitchen with flour and yeast and patient determination. Bread is the foundation of everything, Mrs. Johnson declared, tying an apron around Eleanor's waist. You can live without fancy meals, but you can't live without decent bread. What followed was 4 hours of instruction that left Eleanor's arms aching, her hair covered in flour, and her confidence somewhat battered. Her first attempt at kneading produced dough that was simultaneously too sticky and too tough. Her second attempt fell apart. Her third was finally deemed acceptable with practice. Don't look so discouraged, said Mrs. Chen, the blacksmith's wife. My first 20 loaves were disasters. May used them to prop open doors, but now I can make bread in my sleep. 20 loaves? Eleanor felt despair creeping in. Practice is everything out here, Mrs. Johnson said firmly. None of us arrived knowing how to do any of this. We learned by doing, failing, and trying again. You will too. By the end of the day, Eleanor had produced 2 loaves that were edible, if not exactly beautiful. The women praised her progress with genuine warmth, and Eleanor felt the first stirrings of something that might become confidence. Tuesday was devoted to riding lessons with Samuel. He decided Eleanor needed to be competent on horseback before the wedding, for both practical and symbolic reasons. If you're going to be a rancher's wife, you need to be able to ride out to help if something goes wrong, he explained as he saddled Sage. And I want you to feel free to explore the property, not trapped in the house. The lesson was more challenging than previous ones. Samuel had Eleanor practice mounting and dismounting until she could do it smoothly, then moved on to steering and stopping with precision. Sage was patient, but Eleanor's legs trembled with effort, and she felt clumsy and inadequate. I'm terrible at this, she said, after her 5th failed attempt to guide Sage around a barrel. You're learning, Samuel corrected. That's different from terrible. He walked over and adjusted her posture, his hands careful and respectful. You're tensing up, which makes Sage tense. Relax your shoulders. Trust her to do her job. Everyone keeps telling me to trust, but trust is hard. I know. Samuel's voice was gentle. But it does get easier with repetition. Like muscle memory, the more you practice trusting, the more natural it becomes. By the end of the lesson, Eleanor had successfully completed the barrel course twice. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and Samuel's proud smile made the aching muscles worthwhile. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was helping Martha with mending when a knock came at the boarding house door. Martha opened it to reveal Dr. Kate Morrison holding a small leather bag. I've brought something for Eleanor, Kate said. May I come up? In Eleanor's room, Kate set the bag on the bed and opened it to reveal bottles, tins, and small paper packets. Medical supplies, she explained. Things you'll need at the ranch. Laudanum for severe pain, quinine for fever, bandages, antiseptic powder, and some herbs for common ailments. I don't know how to use most of these, Eleanor admitted. That's why I'm here. Kate spent the next hour teaching Eleanor basic medical care. How to clean and dress wounds, recognize signs of serious illness, treat burns and minor injuries. Her instruction was thorough and matter-of-fact, treating Eleanor like a competent student rather than a delicate lady. The most important thing is knowing when to get help, Kate emphasized. Don't try to be a hero. If something is beyond your skill, send Samuel to town for me immediately. Pride kills more people out here than any disease. Thank you for this, for everything, really. Kate's expression softened slightly. We need to look after each other out here. It's the only way we survive. She paused. And Eleanor? I'm glad you're staying. I think you'll be good for Samuel and good for this community. What if I'm not? Then we'll help you become what's needed. That's what neighbors do. Thursday was the final dress fitting. Kate had transformed Mrs. Johnson's simple wedding dress into something that fit Eleanor perfectly, with small adjustments that made it feel personal rather than borrowed. Eleanor stood in front of Martha's mirror, seeing herself in bridal clothes for the first time. You look beautiful, Martha said firmly. Samuel's a lucky man. I think I'm the lucky one, actually. Eleanor touched the fabric carefully. I could have ended up with someone cruel or indifferent. Instead, I got someone patient and kind. That's not luck, Martha said. That's wisdom in choosing. You saw Samuel's character in his letters and trusted it. That takes judgment. Friday arrived with startling speed, bringing a mixture of relief and panic. Tomorrow, she would marry Samuel Hart. Tomorrow, her life would change irrevocably. Tomorrow, she would become someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's responsibility and companion. The day was devoted to final preparations. Eleanor packed her belongings, which seemed pitifully small, 2 trunks of clothes and books, a few personal items, her mother's cameo. Everything she owned in the world fit into 2 wooden trunks. It seemed simultaneously too much and not nearly enough for starting a new life. Samuel arrived in the afternoon with the wagon, ready to transport her belongings to the ranch before the wedding. Martha had insisted it was proper for the bride's things to be in place before the ceremony, though Eleanor suspected this was more practicality than tradition. Are you ready? Samuel asked as he loaded the first trunk. Eleanor looked at the boarding house that had been her haven for 2 weeks, at the street that had become familiar, at the mountains that still took her breath away. I'm ready. The drive to the ranch felt different this time. Not like a visit, but like coming home. Samuel had clearly spent the morning in frantic preparation. Wildflowers filled vases in every room, their bright colors cheerful against the log walls. The kitchen was spotlessly clean, and he'd laid in extra supplies that suggested careful planning about Eleanor's preferences and needs. They carried her trunks upstairs to the loft room, and Samuel left her alone to arrange her belongings while he tended to the evening chores. Eleanor unpacked slowly, placing her books on the shelf Samuel had built, hanging her dresses in the small closet, setting her hairbrush and mirror on the dresser. Each item found its place, and gradually the room transformed from generic space to her space. When everything was arranged, Eleanor sat on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of what was happening. Tomorrow she would stand in church and vow to love, honor, and cherish this man for the rest of her life. Tomorrow she would take his name and his home and his future as her own. The fear was still there, but it had changed texture. It was no longer the paralyzing terror of the unknown, but the sharp, clean fear of standing at a precipice, knowing you're about to jump, choosing to jump anyway, because staying on solid ground means never knowing if you could fly. Samuel knocked softly on the doorframe. "Eleanor, dinner's ready if you're hungry." She followed him downstairs to find the table set for two, with a simple meal that he'd clearly put effort into preparing. The beef was slightly overcooked, the vegetables were overdone, but the gesture behind it made Eleanor's throat tight. "I'm not much of a cook," Samuel admitted, "but I wanted our last meal before the wedding to feel special." "It's perfect," Eleanor said, and meant it. They ate slowly, talking about small things. The weather forecast for tomorrow, the guests who'd confirmed attendance, the logistics of the ceremony, safe topics that danced around the enormity of what lay ahead. As the meal ended and darkness fell outside, Samuel stood and offered his hand. "Come outside. I want to show you something." He led her out onto the porch, and Eleanor gasped. The night sky was ablaze with stars, more stars than she'd ever seen, scattered so thickly across the heavens that they seemed to merge into rivers of light. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a bridge between worlds. "I wanted you to see this before tomorrow," Samuel said softly. "This is what you're choosing. Not just me or the ranch or the work, but this. The beauty that exists out here. The moments that make everything else worthwhile." Eleanor stared upward, overwhelmed by the vast indifference and terrible beauty of the universe. In Boston, the sky had been a distant ceiling. Here, it was infinite possibility. "My mother used to say that when you look at the stars, you're seeing the past," Samuel continued. "The light takes so long to reach us that some of those stars might already be dead. We're seeing what they were, not what they are." He paused. "But she also said that makes them more precious, not less, because it means that beauty persists even after the source is gone. The light keeps traveling." That's a beautiful thought. She was a beautiful person. Samuel's voice caught slightly. "I wish you could have known her. I wish she could have known you. Tell me more about her, about both of them." So Samuel did. Under the star-scattered sky, he told Eleanor stories about his parents, their courtship, their journey west, their first difficult years establishing the ranch. He told her about his mother's laugh and his father's terrible jokes, about the time a cow got into the vegetable garden and his mother chased it with a broom, while his father collapsed with laughter, about the silent understandings they'd developed over years of partnership. They weren't perfect, Samuel said. They argued and made mistakes and hurt each other sometimes without meaning to. But they always came back to respect, to the understanding that they were on the same side, building something together. "That's what I want," Eleanor said quietly. "Not perfection, but partnership. Not romance, but respect." "We'll build it," Samuel promised, "starting tomorrow." They stood on the porch until the night grew cold, and then Samuel drove Eleanor back to the boarding house for her final night there. At the door, he took both her hands in his. "Tomorrow, everything changes," he said. "But I want you to know, no matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, I'll never regret choosing you. Never regret that you chose me back." "Samuel," Eleanor's voice broke. "Sleep well, Eleanor. I'll see you at the church." That night, Eleanor lay in the boarding house bed for the last time, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling, the street outside, the wind in the pines. Tomorrow she would wake in this room as Eleanor Price. Tomorrow night she would sleep at the ranch as Eleanor Hart. The transformation seemed impossible and inevitable all at once. She thought about Abraham leaving his home. She thought about Samuel's mother choosing the West over Pennsylvania comfort. She thought about every woman who'd ever stood at a crossroads and chosen the harder path because it led somewhere worth going. And she thought about tomorrow, about standing in church before God and witnesses and promising to build a life with a man she'd known for 3 weeks. The reasonableness of it seemed laughable. The rightness of it felt undeniable. Eleanor finally slept as false dawn painted the eastern sky, and dreamed of mountains and starlight and a hand extended in patience, waiting for her to take that first brave step. Morning came too quickly. Martha woke her with coffee and nervous energy, and suddenly the day was in motion. The bath was drawn, the dress was prepared, the flowers were arranged. Mrs. Johnson arrived to help with Eleanor's hair, pinning it in an elaborate style that was both elegant and practical. Kate brought the medical bag to leave at the ranch and stayed to offer quiet support. "Breathe," Kate reminded Eleanor as Martha laced the wedding dress. "Fainting at your own wedding is dramatically excessive." "I'm not going to faint." "Good, because I'd have to catch you, and this dress is too nice to crumple." The church bells began ringing at 9:30, their sound carrying across the valley. Eleanor's hands shook as she pulled on her gloves, and Martha caught them in her own steady grip. "You can do this, dear. You're stronger than you know." "What if I'm not?" "Then you'll become stronger. That's how strength works. It's built through necessity, not discovered through certainty." The walk to the church felt both endless and too short. The morning sun was bright, the air crisp with autumn's approach, and the church was filled with what seemed like the entire population of Red River Crossing. Eleanor paused at the door, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what she was about to do. Then she saw Samuel standing at the altar, and everything else fell away. He'd dressed in his best suit, his hair was neatly combed, and his expression was a mixture of nervousness and wonder. When their eyes met across the church, he smiled. Not the polite social smile of strangers, but the genuine, unguarded smile of someone seeing exactly what they'd hoped to see. Eleanor walked down the aisle alone, her head high, her steps steady. No father to give her away, no family to witness and support, just herself, making this choice, taking this step, claiming this future. Samuel's hand was warm when she reached him, his grip steady and sure. Reverend Holt's words washed over them, the traditional vows, the promises to love and honor, the blessing on their union. "Do you, Eleanor Grace Price, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Eleanor looked into Samuel's blue eyes and saw patience and hope and the promise of partnership. She thought of all the moments that had led here. The advertisement answered, the stagecoach boarded, the hand extended, the choice made and remade each day until it became inevitable. "I do," she said, her voice clear and certain. "And do you, Samuel James Hart, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Samuel's voice was rough with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Samuel leaned forward slowly, giving Eleanor time to close the distance or pull away. She met him halfway, their first real kiss gentle and brief, and somehow containing all the promise of what they might build together. The church erupted in applause, and then they were walking back down the aisle together, no longer two separate people with separate futures, but a partnership, a unit, a possibility made real. Outside, the congregation showered them with flower petals and good wishes. Mrs. Johnson was crying openly. Martha was smiling with satisfaction. Even Dr. Kate looked pleased, which Eleanor suspected was as close to emotional as the practical doctor typically allowed herself. Ruby Cassidy stood at the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Eleanor caught her eye, and something passed between them, not friendship, but perhaps understanding. They were both women who'd made choices and would live with the consequences, for better or worse. Samuel helped Eleanor into the wagon, his wagon now, their wagon, and they began the journey back to the ranch. Behind them, the town was organizing for the reception that would happen later, but for now they had these quiet hours to transition from the ceremony to the reality. "How are you feeling?" Samuel asked as they left town behind. "Strange, real, terrified, hopeful." Eleanor looked down at the simple gold band on her finger, Samuel's mother's ring, now hers. "Like I've just done something either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, and I won't know which for years." "Maybe both," Samuel suggested. "Maybe the bravest things always look foolish from the outside." The ranch appeared before them, and Eleanor saw it with new eyes. Not a stranger's home she was visiting, but her home. Her responsibility and her refuge and her future all at once. Samuel carried her across the threshold as tradition demanded, setting her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hart." Mrs. Hart. Eleanor Hart. A new name for a new life. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being patient, for waiting while I figured things out, for extending your hand and letting me take my time reaching for it." Samuel cupped her face gently, his calloused hands tender against her cheeks. "You took one brave step off that stagecoach, and it changed both our lives. I'll spend the rest of mine making sure you never regret it. And if I do, then we'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means." They stood in the main room of the ranch house, husband and wife, partners in an adventure neither could fully predict. Outside, the Colorado afternoon stretched golden across the valley they would steward together. The work would be hard, the winters would be long, and the challenges would be many. But in that moment, with Samuel's hands warm on her face and the promise of tomorrow spreading before them like the endless sky, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. She felt hope, real, solid, earned hope built on choice and courage, and the first tentative threads of trust. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The reception that evening brought the entire community to the ranch, transforming the quiet homestead into a celebration that lasted well past sunset. Wagons arrived bearing food and drink, fiddles and guitars emerged from careful wrapping, and the barn was cleared for dancing. Eleanor found herself swept into conversations and introductions. Her new name repeated so many times it began to feel real rather than borrowed. "Mrs. Hart, you must try my apple cake," one woman insisted, pressing a plate into Eleanor's hands. "Mrs. Hart, my husband wants to discuss cattle breeding with Samuel," another said, pulling her toward a cluster of ranchers. "Mrs. Hart, when you're settled, I hope you'll join our quilting circle," a third offered with genuine warmth. Each repetition of her married name was like a small stitch, binding her more firmly into the fabric of this community, this life, this identity she'd chosen to assume. Samuel stayed close throughout the evening, his hand occasionally finding hers in the crowd, his presence a steady anchor in the overwhelming whirl of celebration. When the dancing started, he led her onto the makeshift floor with endearing nervousness. "Fair warning, I'm not particularly graceful." "Neither am I," Eleanor admitted as they began a simple waltz. "We'll stumble through together." And they did, moving with more determination than elegance, but something in the shared awkwardness felt right. They were learning each other's rhythms, adjusting to the weight and presence of partnership. And if they stepped on each other's feet occasionally, well, that seemed like good practice for the larger dance of marriage ahead. The last guests departed around midnight, their wagons disappearing into darkness, with called blessings and laughter trailing behind. Suddenly the ranch was quiet again, and Eleanor and Samuel stood in the yard, exhausted and exhilarated, faced with the reality of their first night as husband and wife. "I should check the animals one last time," Samuel said, his nervousness palpable. "Make sure everything's secure for the night." "I'll clean up the kitchen," Eleanor offered, grateful for the practical task that delayed the awkward navigation of sleeping arrangements and expectations. They worked in companionable silence, each attending to their responsibilities while dancing around the elephant in the room. Finally, with nothing left to delay, they stood in the main room and Samuel cleared his throat. "Eleanor, I meant what I said. No pressure, no expectations. Your room is ready upstairs, and I'll sleep down here. When and if you want things to change, you just say the word." Relief and something more complicated, disappointment perhaps, washed through Eleanor. "Thank you for understanding." "We have time," Samuel said simply, "all the time we need." That night, Eleanor lay in her loft room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. She could hear Samuel moving below, the creak of floorboards, the soft sounds of him preparing for sleep. She was married. She was a wife. She was Eleanor Hart, rancher, partner, builder of a life she couldn't quite envision yet. The strangeness of it kept her awake for hours, but eventually exhaustion claimed her, and she slept dreamlessly until dawn light painted her window gold. The next morning began the real work of building a life together. Samuel had given her a week to settle in before expecting her to contribute fully to the ranch operations, but Eleanor found herself restless with the need to be useful. She tackled the neglected vegetable garden first, spending hours pulling weeds and assessing what could be salvaged from Samuel's well-meaning but inexpert care. "I killed most of it, didn't I?" Samuel asked, finding her elbow deep in dirt that afternoon. "Not killed, just neglected." Eleanor sat back on her heels, surveying the garden with a critical eye. "But there's potential here. Your mother planned this garden well. Good sun exposure, proper drainage, enough space for rotation. We can restore it." "We," Samuel repeated with a smile. I'm still not used to that word applying to me. Over the following weeks, Eleanor threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life with the same determination that had gotten her onto the stagecoach in the first place. Mrs. Johnson came twice a week to teach preserving and canning, and Eleanor's kitchen gradually filled with jars of vegetables, fruits, and pickles that would see them through the winter. Mrs. Chen taught her to make soap and candles, practical skills that transformed from chores into meditative satisfaction. Kate Morrison visited regularly, ostensibly to check on Eleanor's adjustment, but really, Eleanor suspected, because the doctor was lonely and appreciated female conversation that didn't revolve around illnesses and injuries. They fell into a friendship built on honesty and mutual respect, two women who'd chosen unconventional paths and were determined to make them work. "You're doing better than I expected," Kate observed one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "Most Eastern women take months to adjust. You've taken to it in weeks." "I don't have months," Eleanor said practically. "Winter is coming, and I need to be prepared. Besides, staying busy keeps me from overthinking everything." "Overthinking what?" Eleanor paused in her weeding. "Whether I made the right choice. Whether I'm suited for this. Whether Samuel regrets choosing me. Does he seem like he regrets it? No, he's been nothing but patient and kind." Which somehow makes me more anxious, because I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Kate snorted. "Not every shoe drops, Eleanor. Sometimes people are just genuinely decent. Samuel's one of them. Accept it and move on." But accepting genuine goodness proved harder than Eleanor anticipated. She'd been raised on caution, trained by experience to expect disappointment, and Samuel's consistent kindness felt too good to trust fully. She found herself testing him in small ways, being difficult when she was frustrated, asking for help with tasks she could manage alone, watching to see when his patience would crack. It never did. When she snapped at him over a burned dinner, he just helped clean up and suggested they try again tomorrow. When she struggled with writing and wanted to give up, he simply shortened the lessons and praised small improvements. When she had nightmares about her father's death and woke gasping, he appeared at her door with warm milk and patient silence, asking nothing but offering everything. "Why are you so patient with me?" she finally demanded one evening after she'd been particularly difficult about learning to milk the cows, a task she found frustrating and undignified. Samuel looked up from the harness he was mending, genuinely confused by the question. "Because you're learning, and learning is hard. Why would I be anything but patient? Most men wouldn't be." "Then most men are fools." He set down his work. "Eleanor, I know you're waiting for me to reveal some hidden cruelty or selfishness. I know you're testing me to see when I'll fail your expectations. But I'm not your father, reckless with resources. I'm not your cousin's husband, grabbing at what isn't offered. I'm just Samuel, trying to build a life with someone I respect. I don't know how to prove that except by being consistent." The honesty of it broke something loose in Eleanor's chest. "I'm sorry. I'm being unfair to you." "You're being cautious. That's different from unfair." Samuel's expression was gentle. "But Eleanor, at some point, you'll have to decide whether you're going to trust what you see or keep waiting for disaster. Because I promise you, I'm going to keep being exactly who I've shown you I am." That night marked a turning point. Eleanor lay in her loft room and forced herself to examine her fear honestly. Samuel had given her no reason to doubt him. He'd been consistent, patient, respectful, and genuinely kind for 2 months now. How long would she make him prove himself before she allowed herself to believe in what they were building? The answer came a week later, during the first real crisis of their marriage. Eleanor woke in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of Samuel moving urgently through the house. She descended the stairs to find him pulling on his coat, his face tense with worry. "What's wrong?" "Storm coming. Bad one, according to the signs. I need to get the cattle down from the high pasture before it hits, or we'll lose half the herd." He was already moving toward the door. "I'll be back by nightfall if I'm lucky. Later if I'm not. There's wood stacked for the fire, and I'm coming with you." Samuel stopped. "Eleanor, this isn't a pleasure ride. It'll be hours in the saddle, hard riding, potentially dangerous if the storm catches us. Then you'll need help. 2 people can move cattle faster than 1. She was already heading for the stairs to change into riding clothes. "Don't argue. I'm coming." They rode out as the sky was just beginning to lighten, and Eleanor discovered that she'd underestimated both the difficulty and the exhilaration of real ranch work. The ride to the high pasture was punishing, and gathering the scattered cattle was chaos incarnate. But Samuel worked alongside her with easy competence, showing her what to do without condescension, trusting her to handle tasks that made her heart race with a mixture of terror and pride. The storm hit when they were halfway back to the ranch, turning the afternoon dark as evening and unleashing rain that felt like liquid ice. Thunder rolled across the valley, and lightning fractured the sky, spooking the cattle and making the horses sidestep nervously. Eleanor was soaked through in minutes, her hands numb on the reins, but she kept riding, kept pushing the cattle forward, kept matching Samuel's tireless pace. When they finally got the herd secure in the lower pasture and turned the horses toward home, Eleanor was shaking with exhaustion and cold. Samuel noticed immediately, pulling up beside her. "Can you make it? We're only about 20 minutes out." "I can make it," Eleanor said through chattering teeth. "I'm not made of sugar. I won't melt." Samuel's laugh was warm despite the freezing rain. "No, you're definitely not made of sugar." They stabled the horses and stumbled into the house, both of them dripping and exhausted. Samuel immediately built up the fire while Eleanor peeled off her soaked riding clothes with fingers that barely worked. She changed into dry things and came back downstairs to find Samuel had done the same and was making coffee with shaking hands. "That was terrifying," Eleanor said, accepting the cup he offered. "That was incredible," Samuel corrected. "Eleanor, you were amazing out there. You kept up, stayed calm, did exactly what needed doing. I couldn't have managed alone." "Really? Really? You saved half our herd today. You're a rancher now, whether you feel like one or not." Something shifted in Eleanor's chest. Pride, yes, but also belonging. She'd proven something to herself out there in the storm, had discovered reserves of strength and courage she doubted existed. She'd been tested by this land and found not wanting. "Samuel," she said quietly, "I think I'm ready." He looked confused. "Ready for what?" "To stop sleeping in separate rooms, to be your wife properly, in all the ways that means." She set down her coffee cup. "I trust you. I'm choosing you, not out of desperation or lack of options, but because I genuinely want to build this life with you." Samuel's expression transformed, joy and relief, and something deeper flooding his features. "Are you certain? Because we can still wait. I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm certain." Eleanor crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "You've been patient beyond reason. You've proven yourself 100 times over. I don't need more proof. I need to start living our life instead of tiptoeing around the edges of it." That night marked the true beginning of their marriage, and Eleanor discovered that intimacy built on friendship and respect was something entirely different from the fumbling encounters she'd heard whispered about in Boston. Samuel was gentle and patient, and if there was awkwardness, and there was also laughter and tenderness and the sense of discovering something together, rather than one person instructing the other. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms in the bedroom that had been his parents' and was now theirs, Eleanor felt a peace she'd never experienced before. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely. She suspected it never would, but it had been joined by something stronger. Trust, yes, but also partnership. The bone-deep knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. that she'd chosen someone who would face difficulties alongside her, rather than leaving her to struggle in isolation. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For waiting. For being patient. For being exactly who you promised you'd be." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for giving me the chance, for being brave enough to take that first step." The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Eleanor learned to bake bread that was actually good, to churn butter without ending up covered in it, to ride out to check on cattle without terror clutching her heart. She took over the account books completely, her neat columns and careful calculations bringing order to ranch finances in a way that made Samuel shake his head in admiration. "My mother would have loved you," he said one evening, watching her work. "She always said the mind was just as important as the muscle in making a ranch succeed." "I wish I could have known her." "You do know her in a way. She's in everything here, the garden layout, the preserving methods, the account system. Every time you use something she created, you're getting to know her." Winter arrived gradually, the days shortening and temperatures dropping until snow began to dust the mountains. Eleanor had been warned about Colorado winters, but the reality was both harder and more beautiful than she'd imagined. The work of keeping the ranch running increased exponentially, hauling water that froze overnight, breaking ice in troughs, ensuring the animals had shelter and feed, keeping the house warm enough to be livable. But there were compensations. The snow transformed the valley into something from a fairy tale, pristine and glittering. The forced closeness of winter brought Eleanor and Samuel into even deeper intimacy, hours spent by the fire talking about everything and nothing, reading aloud to each other, making plans for spring. Christmas arrived with a small celebration that included their nearest neighbors. Mrs. Johnson brought her ever-expanding family. The baby had arrived in November, a boy they'd named Samuel in honor of the friend who'd helped them through difficult times. Kate Morrison came bearing gifts she'd clearly struggled to select, practical things like warm socks and good leather gloves. Even Martha Brennan made the trip, bringing enough food to feed everyone twice over. "You've done well," Martha told Eleanor privately as they worked together in the kitchen. "The house looks lived in now, cared for. You've made it a home." "Samuel made it easy," Eleanor said. "He's been everything he promised and more." "That's the difference between a good man and a merely adequate one. A good man makes it easier for you to be your best self." Martha smiled. "You chose well, dear, better than you knew at the time." The new year arrived with a blizzard that trapped them in the house for 3 days. Eleanor learned that cabin fever was a real affliction, that even the deepest love could be tested by unrelenting proximity, and that laughter was essential to surviving close quarters. She and Samuel argued for the first time, a real argument about whether to invest in more cattle or wait another year, and discovered that their conflict resolution was messy, but ultimately productive. "I'm not saying you're wrong," Eleanor insisted. "I'm saying we should be more conservative. Your mother's accounts show what happens when you expand too quickly. And my father's notes show what happens when you're too cautious. You miss opportunities." Samuel's voice was rising with frustration. Better to miss opportunities than risk bankruptcy. They glared at each other for a long moment, and then Samuel started laughing. "We sound like my parents. They had this exact argument at least once a year." "Who usually won?" "Neither. They usually compromised." He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms despite her resistance. "What if we split the difference? Buy half the cattle I want now, half next year if this year goes well?" "That's actually sensible." "Don't sound so surprised. I can be sensible occasionally." The spring that followed was a revelation. Eleanor watched the valley transform from white silence to green abundance, wildflowers carpeting the meadows in waves of color. The garden she'd restored with such effort burst into productivity, and she felt genuine pride in the vegetables they ate from her labor. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Samuel's practical skills balanced by Eleanor's meticulous planning. In April, Eleanor missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, waiting to be certain, but when a second month passed and morning sickness arrived with undeniable clarity, she could no longer hide the truth. She told Samuel one evening on the porch, their favorite place for important conversations. "I'm pregnant. His face cycled through shock, joy, and terror in rapid succession. Are you sure? Kate confirmed it yesterday. She says I'm healthy and everything looks normal. The baby should arrive in late autumn. Samuel pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor felt him trembling. I'm going to be a father, he whispered. We're going to be parents. Are you happy about it? Terrified and thrilled in equal measure. But yes, happy, so happy. He pulled back to look at her. How are you feeling? Not just physically, but about all of it. Eleanor considered the question honestly. Scared. This is dangerous, especially out here, but also excited. We're building something real now, something that will outlast us. Your parents' legacy continuing. Our legacy, Samuel corrected gently. This is ours now, Eleanor. All of it. The pregnancy was easier than Eleanor had feared and harder than she'd hoped. Morning sickness plagued her for months, and the summer heat made her miserable. But Kate monitored her carefully, and Samuel was attentive without being overbearing. He took over the heavier chores without comment, made sure she rested, and didn't complain when she was irritable with discomfort. You're handling this better than most men would, Kate observed during one of her examinations. My mother was sick through most of her pregnancy with me. My father told me later that he felt so helpless, watching her suffer and being unable to fix it. He said the least he could do was make everything else easier. Samuel squeezed Eleanor's hand. I figure the same applies here. The baby arrived in October, during the golden autumn days when the aspens turned the mountainsides to fire. The labor was long and difficult, and Eleanor understood with new clarity why Kate had been so frank about the dangers of childbirth. But Samuel stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and offering quiet encouragement. And when Kate finally placed a squalling baby boy in Eleanor's arms, the pain faded into insignificance. He's perfect, Eleanor whispered, studying the tiny face with wonder. He's ours, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. Our son, the future we're building. They named him James, after Eleanor's father, with Samuel as his middle name, a bridge between the past they'd left behind and the future they were creating. The baby transformed the ranch completely, filling the house with noise and need and exhausting, overwhelming love. Eleanor discovered that motherhood was simultaneously harder and more rewarding than anything she'd attempted before. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the weight of responsibility for this tiny life. It was crushing and beautiful all at once. Samuel proved to be a natural father, patient and tender with his son, willing to walk the floor at 3 a.m. so Eleanor could sleep. This is what they meant, Eleanor said one night, watching Samuel rock the baby with unconscious grace. When they said marriage is a partnership, this sharing of everything, joy and hardship, success and failure, the work of building a life. It is, Samuel agreed, and I wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. The years that followed blurred together in a haze of work and love and the steady accumulation of a life well lived. A second child arrived 18 months after James, a daughter they named Clara, after Samuel's mother. The ranch prospered, expanding gradually as Eleanor's careful planning and Samuel's hard work bore fruit. They added a second barn, improved the irrigation system, and became known throughout the territory for the quality of their stock. Eleanor became a fixture in the Red River Crossing community, joining the quilting circle she'd once been invited to, teaching school 2 days a week when the regular teacher fell ill, and serving as Martha Brennan's unofficial assistant at the boarding house during busy seasons. She'd found her place, not by trying to fit into an existing role, but by creating one that suited her strengths and interests. Kate Morrison remained her closest friend, the two women supporting each other through the challenges of frontier life. When Kate faced pressure to marry and abandon her practice, Eleanor rallied the ranch wives to petition the territorial government to officially recognize female physicians. When Eleanor struggled with the isolation of motherhood, Kate made regular visits and never once suggested that Eleanor should be grateful for what she had, rather than honest about what she struggled with. Ruby Cassidy eventually left Red River Crossing, heading to Denver with money saved from her saloon work and a determination to start fresh. Before she left, she sought out Eleanor one final time. "I was wrong about you," Ruby said without preamble. "I thought you'd break or run, but you stayed, and you made it work." I almost didn't, Eleanor admitted. There were days I wanted to give up. But you didn't. That's the difference between us. I let the hard times define me. You let them refine you. Ruby's smile was sad. Take care of Samuel. He's one of the good ones. I will. And Ruby, I hope you find what you're looking for in Denver. Peace, maybe. Or at least the absence of bitter memories. She touched Eleanor's arm briefly. Goodbye, Eleanor Hart. I'm glad one of us got the happy ending. 10 years after Eleanor first stepped off the stagecoach, terrified and uncertain, she stood on the ranch porch watching her children play in the yard. James, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Clara to rope a fence post, both of them laughing at their failures and celebrating small successes. The ranch hummed with life and purpose around them, cattle grazing in the valley, horses running in the pasture, the vegetable garden bursting with autumn harvest. Samuel came to stand beside her, sliding an arm around her waist, with the easy familiarity of a decade together. What are you thinking about? About the woman who stepped off that stagecoach 10 years ago. How scared she was. How certain she was making a mistake. Do you still think it was a mistake? Eleanor leaned into his solid warmth, watching the sunlight paint the mountains in shades of gold. I think it was the bravest thing I've ever done, and the best. Even with all the hardship, the difficult winters, the endless work, the times when we barely scraped by, especially because of those things, they proved that the life we built together was real, not some fantasy based on pretty words and false promises. We survived because we worked together, because we chose each other over and over again. She turned to look at him. You gave me the choice to step down from that stagecoach or stay frozen in fear. And then you gave me every choice after that, the choice to trust, the choice to love, the choice to build this life. That's the gift you gave me, Samuel. Not security or comfort, but the power to choose my own future. Samuel pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. And you gave me partnership, purpose beyond just surviving. You made this ranch a home instead of just a place I was trying to preserve as a memorial to my parents. A rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch, a woman on horseback, sitting side saddle with careful grace. As she drew closer, Eleanor recognized the fine fabric of her traveling dress, the uncertain set of her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the reins with white-knuckled tension. Another mail-order bride, Samuel observed quietly. The Henderson boys, I think. She arrived on yesterday's stage. Eleanor watched the woman ride past, seeing herself a decade ago in every line of the stranger's body. She thought about calling out, offering words of encouragement or welcome. But what could she say that would make any difference? That the fear was real, but so was the possibility? That courage wasn't the absence of doubt, but the decision to move forward despite it? Instead, she simply raised her hand in greeting, and after a moment's hesitation, the woman waved back. A small gesture, but perhaps that was enough. Perhaps all anyone needed was the acknowledgement that they'd been seen, that their fear was recognized, that someone else had walked this path before them and survived. Should we invite them for dinner sometime? Samuel asked. The Henderson boy and his new bride? It might help her feel less alone. That's a good idea. Mrs. Johnson did the same for me when I needed to see what a successful frontier marriage looked like. And what does a successful frontier marriage look like? Eleanor considered the question, looking out at the life they'd built together. The house that had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. The barn Samuel had built with his own hands, with Eleanor keeping the accounts to ensure they could afford it. The garden that was now 3 times its original size, producing enough to feed their family and trade with neighbors. The cattle bearing their brand, the horses they'd bred and trained, the land they'd improved and enriched with their labor. But more than the physical evidence of success, she thought about the intangible things. The way Samuel still reached for her hand when they sat together in the evenings. The laughter that filled their house even during difficult times. The arguments they'd learned to navigate without destroying the foundation of respect beneath them. The way they'd learned to support each other's individual growth while nurturing their partnership. It looks like 2 people who chose each other and kept choosing each other, even when it was hard, Eleanor said finally. It looks like respect that deepened into love, and love that matured into partnership. It looks like building something together that neither of us could have created alone. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Speaking of building things together, I wanted to discuss something with you. There's a piece of land adjacent to our property coming up for sale. It would expand our range significantly, give us room to grow the herd, and maybe add those sheep I've been considering. Eleanor took the paper, studying the rough map and figures Samuel had sketched out. It was ambitious, expensive, and exactly the kind of calculated risk that his father's notes suggested led to lasting success. What do you think we should do? I think we should decide together. Look at the accounts, assess our resources, and make the choice that feels right for our family's future. He smiled. That's how we've always done it, and it hasn't failed us yet. They spent the rest of the afternoon going over the numbers, debating pros and cons, considering scenarios and contingencies. It was the kind of conversation that would have bored or frustrated many couples, but for Eleanor and Samuel, it was intimate collaboration. This was their language of love, not grand gestures or romantic declarations, but the daily practice of building something together, making decisions as a unit, trusting each other's judgment and perspective. By evening, they'd reached a decision, and Eleanor drafted a letter to the land agent expressing their interest. As she sealed the envelope, she felt the same mixture of fear and excitement that had accompanied every major decision of their marriage. But the fear was manageable now, balanced by a decade of evidence that they could weather challenges together. That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Eleanor and Samuel sat on their porch and watched the stars emerge. It was the same porch where Samuel had first asked Eleanor to trust him, where they'd made the decision to marry, where they'd navigated countless small and large moments of their life together. Do you remember what you said to me that first day when I couldn't step down from the stagecoach? Eleanor asked. I said a lot of things that day. You asked if I could manage just one step, just one, and promised you'd be there to make sure I didn't fall. Samuel's hand found hers in the darkness. I remember. I've been thinking about that lately. How every choice we make is really just one step. One decision, one action, one moment of courage, and then another step after that, and another. Until eventually, you look back and realize you've traveled further than you ever imagined possible. That's a good way of thinking about it. I couldn't have made it without you, Eleanor continued, not just because of your practical help, though that mattered, but because you gave me room to take those steps at my own pace. You didn't push or pressure or try to carry me. You just walked alongside me, steady and patient, and let me learn to trust both you and myself. Samuel raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You did all the hard work, Eleanor. I just held out my hand and waited. No, Eleanor said firmly. You did so much more than that. You created space for me to become who I needed to be. You respected my fear while believing in my strength. You built a partnership where I had a voice, power, and the freedom to make real choices about my life. She leaned her head on his shoulder. That's the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, the chance to choose my own future and the support to make that future real. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the vast Colorado sky perform its nightly miracle of stars. Below them, the valley was dark, except for scattered lights from neighboring ranches, each one representing another family, another story of people who'd chosen this hard, beautiful life, and were making it work through determination and partnership. I have something for you, Samuel said suddenly, pulling an envelope from his pocket. I wrote this years ago and kept meaning to give it to you, but the time never felt right. But sitting here now, thinking about everything we've built together, it feels right. Eleanor took the envelope with curious hands, opening it to find a letter in Samuel's careful handwriting. She had to angle it toward the lamplight spilling from the window to read. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to give you what I wrote on our first wedding anniversary. A year ago, you stepped off a stagecoach and into my life, and I was so busy trying to make you comfortable that I forgot to tell you what your presence meant to me. Before you came, this ranch was a monument to my parents' memory, beautiful but lifeless, maintained but not truly lived in. I was a caretaker, not a builder. I was surviving, not thriving. I'd placed that advertisement partly because I needed practical help, but mostly because I was drowning in loneliness and didn't know how else to reach for connection. Then you arrived, terrified and trying so hard to hide it, and something in me recognized something in you. We were both people who'd been hurt by life, made cautious by loss, but still brave enough to reach for the possibility of something better. Watching you transform from that frightened woman on the stagecoach to the confident partner you are now has been the greatest privilege of my life. Not because I changed you, you did that yourself through your own courage and determination, but because I got to witness it, support it, and benefit from it. You made this house a home. You made my work have meaning beyond mere survival. You made me believe in the future again instead of just honoring the past. And you did all of this while fighting your own fears and doubts, while learning skills you'd never needed before, while adapting to a life completely different from everything you'd known. I love you, Eleanor Hart. Not because you're perfect, neither of us is, but because you're brave and honest and willing to keep trying even when things are hard. Because you chose me when you had every reason to run away. Because you keep choosing me day after day, even when I'm difficult or stubborn or foolish. Thank you for taking that first step off the stagecoach. Thank you for every step after that. Thank you for building this life with me. Forever yours, Samuel. Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. Why didn't you give this to me back then? Because I wasn't sure you felt the same way. Because I was afraid I'd overwhelm you with the depth of what I was feeling when you were still figuring out your own emotions. Samuel wiped a tear from her cheek gently. But now, 10 years later, I hope you know. I hope you understand how much you mean to me, how grateful I am for every day we have together. I do know, Eleanor whispered, and I feel the same way. This life we've built, it's hard and demanding and sometimes frustrating, but it's ours. We chose it, shaped it, made it into something meaningful, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. They held each other as the night deepened around them, two people who'd started as strangers and become partners, who'd taken a leap of faith and built it into a lifetime of love and purpose. Inside the house, Clara called out, a bad dream perhaps, or just needing reassurance. Eleanor stood to go to her daughter, and Samuel rose as well, both of them responding to their child's need with the easy coordination of long practice. As they walked inside together, Eleanor paused at the threshold and looked back at the valley one last time. The stars were brilliant overhead. The mountains stood sentinel in the darkness, and the land spread out before them full of promise and possibility. 10 years ago, she'd been too afraid to step down from a stagecoach. A kind cowboy had extended his hand and waited while she found her courage. That single moment of choice had changed everything, not just her circumstances, but her entire understanding of who she could be and what she deserved. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That strength wasn't something you were born with, but something you built through facing challenges. That love wasn't just romantic feeling, but daily choice, consistent action, and the steady accumulation of shared experiences. And she'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was accept someone's outstretched hand and trust that together you could build something neither of you could create alone. Eleanor? Samuel called from inside. Clara's asking for you. Coming, she called back. She took one last look at the stars, then turned and walked into her home, into the life she'd chosen and built and earned through courage and determination and the daily practice of love. The door closed behind her, shutting out the night. Inside, her family waited, husband and children, the future they'd created together. Outside, the Colorado wilderness stretched endlessly, as beautiful and challenging as it had been that first day she'd arrived. But Eleanor wasn't afraid of it anymore. She'd taken that first step, and then another, and another, until the impossible journey became her everyday life, until the stranger became her beloved husband, until the terrifying unknown became home. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.